2001 in Bolingbrook, Illinois, a town on the outskirts of Chicago.
It's a bedroom community in the Chicago area, you know, a blue-collar community.
It's a quiet, suburban town, you know, not a lot of crime, not a lot going on, period, you know.
Drew Peterson is a sergeant with the Bolingbrook Police Department.
Drew looked like typical cop, probably about 200 pounds, a little bit heavy, a wise guy type of attitude.
He was just sort of more a patrol sergeant, spent a lot of time in his car.
He lives with his wife, Kathleen, and their 2 young sons.
She was a knockout, just very beautiful girl, feisty Italian girl.
Hey.
How was your day?
Awesome. How was yours?
Drew and Kathleen met on a blind date. She liked his confidence. She liked his willingness to take care of her.
The enterprising police officer works hard to support his family's comfortable lifestyle, taking on a range of other jobs.
Drew was a hustler. He worked a lot of places. He owned a lot of businesses. He taught karate. He had a wedding photography business. He was a chimney sweep business. He had a printing business.
429.6.
Kathleen stands loyally by her husband's side, keeping their lives on track.
Looked like they had a very stable marriage and family and lifestyle.
After years of hard work, Drew and Kathleen appear to have it all. But as the couple nears their 10th anniversary, the foundations of their marriage are beginning to crumble. Drew is spending more time on the night shift and disappearing during the day, leading Kathleen to suspect that her husband is having an affair.
Kathleen had told friends and family that Drew wasn't faithful during their marriage. She overlooked that for many years.
Their suspicions aren't unfounded. Drew has been divorced twice before with a child from his first marriage.
Drew really is a relationship kind of guy, and before he leaves one relationship, he likes to make sure he has another relationship going on. Some describe him as a serial cheater.
Although Kathleen has a hunch, she has no proof that there's anything going on. But the truth is far worse than she could have imagined. It starts one night when Drew is out on patrol and responds to a disturbance at a hotel.
Excuse me, ma'am.
The call was made by the hotel's teenage receptionist, Stacy Kales.
Drew Peterson met Stacy while she was working as the overnight desk clerk at a hotel in Bolingbrook. He went there ostensibly to make sure everyone was safe.
Drew and his partner check the premises and reassure Stacy they haven't found anything amiss. But the officer does notice something else, which requires his urgent attention.
Do you have a boyfriend?
When Stacy met Drew, she was 17 years old, and she looked every bit the 17-year-old. She was sort of, wide-eyed. I mean, she was a girl.
Drew strikes up a conversation with Stacy. She's immediately drawn in by his confidence and charm.
I'm sure for Stacy, Drew appeared like this knight in shining armor who came in and saved the day.
Nice to meet you, Stacy.
And there's something very sexually appealing about that.
In spite of a nearly 30-year age difference, Drew and Stacy have instant chemistry.
He was flattered that this very attractive, very young woman was coming on to him. It's a flattering thing.
Before heading back out on patrol, Drew tells Stacy he wants to see her again, and she agrees.
Stacy.
Although she doesn't know it, this chance encounter has just changed the course of her life. Days later, Drew makes an excuse to Kathleen and goes to meet Stacy. He tells her all about his successful businesses and extravagant lifestyle, but he also paints a grim picture of his home life.
Drew told Stacy that his marriage was over. He was living in the basement because he was no longer in a true marriage.
Stacy empathizes with Drew's loneliness and finds herself opening up to him.
Stacy Kales came from a very troubled home. If she had no home, really, when she met Drew. Her mother had addiction problems and vanished. Her father wasn't much of a father by anyone's account.
Stacy and her siblings raised themselves for the most part.
By the end of the date, Stacy is smitten.
You know, Drew paid a lot of attention to her. From what he told me, you know, he was charming, according to him.
He was taking care of her and flirting with her and recognizing her. That was probably like all the characteristics she ever looked for in a guy. A man who was older, who would attend to her and take care of her. And for Drew, he finds this young, attractive woman who finally is going to treat him the way he deserves to be treated, like this hero who's coming in to save the day.
Drew wants to see more of Stacy. And although she has concerns about his wife, he convinces her that the marriage is dead. Now thoroughly infatuated with each other, they begin a passionate affair.
By all accounts, it happened very quickly, Stacy and Drew getting together. She doesn't know any better at that point in her life.
For Stacy, it's a new and thrilling experience to be with an older man, and she can't get enough of Drew.
When Drew is having sex with Stacy, he's probably really getting off on his ability to please her. And he's also falling in love with himself as he's playing this role of hero who's going to save this damsel in distress.
Before long, the middle-aged police officer is utterly hooked on his gorgeous teenage lover. Drew begins seeing Stacy every chance he gets and showering her with expensive gifts.
I got you something.
She was his new target, I guess, the next woman in his life. And he showed her a lot of attention. He bought her a lot of things.
Do you like it?
I love it.
After years of neglect, Stacy feels like she finally has someone who can take care of her.
He ended up putting Stacy up in an apartment. He bought her a car, took her on trips.
I believe Stacy saw a stability. Drew's charismatic personality. He was funny. He was exciting. It's a pretty irresistible thing for a young lady.
With someone like Stacy, he would have sort of the upper hand always in the relationship. She would be dependent upon him for everything.
The harder Drew falls for Stacy, the less concerned he becomes about keeping the affair a secret. One night, Drew brings Stacy to his home and asks her to follow him to the basement. At first, Stacy is hesitant, but she soon gives in to his demands.
Drew wasn't exactly keeping his relationship with Stacy under wraps.
The only person that matters to Drew is Drew. Whether it feels good to Drew, whether Drew wants it. I mean, that is really who this man is at the end of the day.
But this isn't just a case of sneaking around an empty house. Kathleen and the couple's 2 children are asleep upstairs.
He had Stacy coming back to his house while his wife was asleep, having a relationship with her in the basement of the house while his family was sleeping upstairs.
The possibility of getting caught only seems to excite Drew more.
Being willing to sneak your teenage lover into your family home while your wife and kids are sleeping to have sex in a basement. I think that really describes Drew and his feelings of entitlement. He felt he should be able to do this.
I don't think Drew wanted to keep it a secret because he was very proud of it. I think he was very proud to be dating a high school-age girl at the age of 47.
But Drew is playing with fire, and soon he'll have to deal with the dramatic fallout from his exciting new relationship. In October 2001, Kathleen is at home when she receives an anonymous letter.
It was not a secret in Bolingbrook that he was dating a 17-year-old, and that's how the letter ends up in Kathleen Savio's mailbox, telling her that she's become the laughingstock of the town.
The letter goes into detail about Drew and Stacy's affair. To her horror, it even describes the two having sex under her own roof.
Kathleen was not aware that Drew was sleeping with teenage girls in the basement of their house, no matter how dead their marriage may have been, because she supposedly lost it.
She just went through the ceiling with anger.
Kathleen is infuriated that her husband of 10 years has humiliated her so publicly. And Drew's carefree times with Stacy are about to come to a screeching halt. "47-year-old police sergeant Drew Peterson is having an illicit affair with a gorgeous teenager named Stacy.
I think he was very proud to be dating a high school-age girl.
But his wife, Kathleen, has just found out about his cheating. And she's furious.
I think it was a shock that he was cheating on her with a 17-year-old, and I think it was humiliating to be confronted with the fact that everybody in town knows your business.
As soon as Drew arrives home from his night shift, Kathleen confronts him.
What is this? Read it. Kathleen wasn't going to let Drew get away that easily. She had raised his 2 sons. He had reciprocated by humiliating her publicly by dating a 17-year-old.
Now somebody just feels sorry for me.
Drew reacts to that with kind of a haughty dismissiveness, not engaging with her, not apologizing, not telling her that he loves her. He's just basically devaluing her as she's confronting him.
Drew doesn't bother to deny what's been going on and immediately packs his bags.
Drew did move out right after she received the letter. It sort of sent the divorce proceedings into overdrive.
Kathleen knows it will be a struggle to agree on a divorce settlement with Drew.
I just got the papers from Drew.
When she thinks about what he's been doing behind her back, she refuses to consider any compromise arrangement.
No, he is not gonna do this to me.
Kathleen was no dummy. She knew exactly what Drew had, and she also knew exactly how to stick it to Drew. So part of sticking it to Drew was taking his money.
Kathleen is nobody's fool. She has a, bookkeeping background. She knows what money is coming in. Kathleen has a really strong sense of financially where they're at and legally what she believes belongs to her.
And she's dead set on getting her due.
I want to hit him hard. I want at least 2 of those businesses. I'm not kidding.
She wanted to hurt him. It wasn't about the money, she wanted to hurt him. I think whatever she got, she would never have been satisfied.
Drew knows the divorce will take time to settle. And he's not willing to wait for it. Instead, he and Stacy decide to take their relationship to the next level and move in together. They find the perfect house right down the street from Kathleen.
They're living within a half mile of each other on the same street.
He really doesn't mind sticking it to Kathleen by saying, I'm moving in with what you should have been to me. She's young, she treats me like a hero. This is what you should have been like all along, Kathleen.
Drew tells Stacy he wants to get married, but until Kathleen agrees to a divorce, his hands are tied. Stacy begins to resent Kathleen for preventing her from marrying Drew.
Kathy's making it difficult. Stacy wants to move on.
I think Stacy believed everything Drew told her about Kathleen. She bought into it all and sort of looked at Kathleen as the person who was standing between peace for Drew and Stacy.
Convinced that Kathleen is trying to sabotage her relationship, Stacy decides to send a message about just how angry she is. And now that they're neighbors, it's not hard to do.
There was a lot of animosity, not just between Drew and Kathleen, but Stacy was also involved, supposedly, flipping off Kathleen as she rollerbladed by her house.
Kathleen is enraged by the bold teenager, and a bitter rivalry develops between the 2 women.
Stacy would be out in the front yard, sunbathing in a bikini, and it was constantly in Kathleen's face. She was always reminded that her husband had left her for somebody younger and really old enough to be his daughter.
The neighborhood becomes a battleground where they regularly face off.
Kathleen and Stacy despised each other. They were enemies. I mean, they antagonized one another. They called each other terrible names.
I mean, it's really normal to look at the other woman and say to yourself, what does she have that I don't have? Why is he choosing her over me? And how did she get what was mine? It's this feeling of insecurity and feeling like this other woman has something going for her that you don't.
Both are convinced that the other is watching, waiting for one false move that could influence the divorce.
I would assume she hated Stacy. I couldn't see how she wouldn't. She's left with 2 children after a 10-year marriage, and her husband's down the street with a teenage girl.
As the tension between them grows, a confrontation becomes inevitable. One afternoon, Drew and Stacy go to Kathleen's house to pick up his sons for a routine visit.
It began with Stacy filming the custody exchange between Kathleen and Drew, and Kathleen noticed that that was her camera actually filming this custody exchange.
That's my video camera. This proof.
Infuriated that Stacy is invading her privacy, Kathleen goes on the offensive.
She comes charging out of the house like a bull.
I want my video camera back. Give it to me. And you're not taping this. It's ridiculous.
Don't take it.
Come on.
The 2 women got in an altercation.
No, she's not allowed to. This is my house, and you're not videotaping this.
Calm down.
Give me the camera.
Drew, who was not on duty, grabbed Kathleen,
Drew!
threw her down into the ground, forced her face down.
And that just sort of made a bad situation, even worse.
Your fault. You started.
Publicly humiliated by her husband's new girlfriend, Kathleen is determined to make Drew pay financially. This epic battle of wills threatens to engulf them all until tragedy strikes and fear silences everyone. The rivalry between Drew Peterson's soon-to-be ex-wife, Kathleen, and his girlfriend, Stacy, has just boiled over into violence.
She comes charging out of the house like a bull.
I want my video camera back. Give it to me. Give me the camera.
The 2 women got in an altercation.
The police arrive and defuse the situation. No charges are filed, but the incident only inflames the skyrocketing tension. Drew and Kathleen have spent 10 months arguing bitterly over the divorce settlement, with no end in sight. For Stacy, it's been an agonizing wait to marry the man she loves.
Drew gave the impression to Stacy that Kathleen was really stopping everything from moving forward. So I'm sure Stacy started to think about her own creative ideas to help win Drew over so that he could be hers.
And in November 2002, she makes an announcement that will have a big impact on Drew and Kathleen's battle. 18-year-old Stacy is pregnant. With a new baby on the way, the pressure builds on Drew and Kathleen to come to an agreement.
Stacy couldn't be on Drew's insurance because she wasn't his wife, and Drew really needed to get coverage for Stacy.
I'm sure on some level Kathleen felt that Stacy was manipulating, and I'm sure Stacy was manipulating. I'm sure she wanted to get pregnant because she wanted to make her and Drew a legitimate family, and having a child was one way in her mind to do that.
After months of fighting over their marital assets, Kathleen refuses to take anything less than what she feels she's owed.
Harry, it's Kathleen. Do you remember when you...
She agrees to an arrangement that delays the decision over their finances, but allows Drew to marry Stacy.
Yeah, I think we should go ahead and do that. I just feel like it's the right thing to do.
The judge terminated his marriage so he could marry Stacy, but set aside all the property issues, which is usually the biggest part of a divorce.
The decision is delayed until April 2004.
Just a few days after the divorce became final, he married Stacy in a Bolingbrook Park.
For Stacy, it feels like a victory. She finally has the family she's always wanted. The baby arrives in July 2003, and for a brief moment, life appears to move on.
After Drew and Stacy get married, things seem to settle down a little bit for everybody. Everyone seems to be getting along. Kathleen seems to have a new life. She has a new boyfriend. She's, going out places. She seems happy.
But the peace won't last. The decision over Kathleen and Drew's assets is just months away, and no one is willing to back down. At the end of February 2004, Drew goes to Kathleen's house to drop off their sons after a visit.
Drew went to return them on a Sunday night and knocked on the door.
Kathleen!
Nobody answered. So he took the kids back home and he told them perhaps he got it wrong, perhaps with the holiday weekend on Monday, that he was supposed to have them one more night, that their mom had gone away.
The boys are happy to spend another night with their dad. And Drew takes them back to his house.
Monday goes to take them back. She still doesn't answer. Now he gets worried. Now something's wrong. He takes the kids back and he starts trying to find out what happened to Kathy. Goes over to the house, talks to the neighbors. One of Kathy's neighbors, a good friend of hers, and hadn't seen her.
It's completely unlike Kathleen to forget about their custody schedule.
Thank you again for coming by.
Drew brings a neighbor over, and they decide they need to get inside the house.
A locksmith was called in to open the door, and Drew didn't want to go inside.
I'm not allowed inside because of the court proceedings. Maybe you could check it out for me.
Drew asked a neighbor to go in the house because he wasn't allowed in without permission.
Drew waits on the front porch. Suddenly, he hears a scream from inside the house.
Drew rushes into the house when he hears the scream, and he rushes upstairs.
There's a woman in the tub, naked. She's curled in the tub. Her toes and feet are bent at a very strange angle, as if she's struggling to get out.
When he steps closer, he sees that it's Kathleen. It's clear from the way her body's positioned and the color of her skin that she's dead, and she's probably been dead for a while.
Drew immediately calls his colleagues at the local police department.
He takes his cell phone and calls the police and tells them my wife's dead in her bathtub. They decide, this is our own sergeant's wife, and they're going through this divorce. We better call in the state police so there's no conflict.
When the Illinois State Police arrived, Drew Peterson told them, "Hey, this is my ex-wife. Please treat her with respect."
It's a death investigation. It's not a crime investigation. And they do what they're supposed to do, look for signs of, what is this? A suicide? Is it a homicide? Is it an accident? What is it?
The technician examines Kathleen's body and the surrounding area, looking for indications of what may have happened.
Everything else is intact in the room, except she's dead in a dry bathtub and her hair is matted with blood.
After processing the scene and checking the house for signs of forced entry, they find no evidence of a crime.
The crime scene tech decided immediately, or within a half an hour, that Kathleen Savia died accidentally, that her death was an accidental drowning.
They didn't see any signs that would lead one to believe that there was a homicide.
Kathleen's body is sent for an autopsy to determine the official cause of death. As part of the investigation, police conduct a series of interviews to try and find out more about Kathleen's final days. Since Drew was present, Kathleen's body was found, he's asked to give a statement.
They talked to Drew Peterson in a break room at his own police station, at the Bolingbrook police station, out of some sense of professional courtesy.
Even though no foul play is suspected, the police asked Drew if he knew of anyone who might have wanted Kathleen dead.
The state police asked Drew who stood to gain by Kathleen's death, if he stood to gain by Kathleen's death, and he told them he really didn't.
I know the two of you were going through a divorce.
Drew downplays his dispute with Kathleen, tells the investigators he was at home with Stacy and his children all weekend.
It was a very cursory interview because they were investigating an accident. So they sort of let Drew dictate the tone of the conversation.
But when the detectives asked to speak to Stacy, Drew was hesitant, eventually insisting they come to his home and allow him to be present during the interview. As the only person who can confirm Drew's whereabouts over the weekend, Stacy is a critical witness. So the investigators agreed to grant Drew's request and come to the house to question her.
Drew sat next to her and apparently coached her with her answers, helped her answer some of their questions.
When you bring people into the police station and you're interrogating them, the whole notion is to make them uncomfortable. Because if they're uncomfortable, then the police has more power and they can find out more information and they have leverage.
Stacy is clearly shaken up, but Drew attributes her reaction to shock.
He said that she was rattled by Kathleen's death.
I just wanted to touch base about your whereabouts the night of the accident, Kathleen's accident.
Stacy confirmed she was at home on the night Kathleen died, and more importantly, that she wasn't alone.
She tells police that Drew was home with her all night long, and she doesn't waver from that.
She vouched for him.
Stacy volunteers no information about her rivalry with Kathleen. And it leaves investigators with little sense that anything suspicious might have occurred. But soon, another tragedy will befall Stacy and Drew. And from its aftermath, the harrowing truth surrounding Kathleen's death will finally emerge. Police Sergeant Drew Peterson's ex-wife, Kathleen, has died in what appears to be a tragic accident.
They didn't see any signs that would lead one to believe that there was a homicide.
A coroner's inquest is conducted to determine the official cause of death.
She had blood on her hair that they later discovered was from a very serious laceration on her head. The pathologist said that was consistent with a slip and a fall in the bathtub.
The autopsy later showed she drowned. When Kathleen's body was found, the tub was dry, there was no water in it. The police later said that the water seeped out over time through the drain, even though the plug was down.
The death is ruled an accident, and Kathleen is laid to rest. Now free from the financial commitments he was facing in his divorce, Drew is eager to move on and enjoy his life with his sons, his new wife Stacy, and their baby.
Drew's going on with his life at that point. Things look good for Drew.
Three years into their marriage, Stacy has legally adopted Drew's two children and had two of her own.
At this point, Stacy Peterson's 23 years old, where most people would have been, maybe a year out of college, first real job, first good job. She's got 4 children.
And while Stacy loves being a mom, her relationship with Drew has soured.
What is all this? What have you been doing all night?
Over the years, he's become critical and controlling.
You gotta keep it a bit cleaner.
She couldn't go anywhere without him calling or texting to see where she was, when she was going to be home, who she was with.
What about the kitchen?
Marriage to Drew appears to have crushed her youthful spirit.
He manages how Stacy looks, what she says, where she could go, how she spends money. Basically, he doesn't give her an opportunity to breathe or be her own person because he's so on top of her.
He's becoming an old man as she becomes an adult. And I think he felt insecure about that.
Drew begins to feel threatened by the age difference that once excited him.
I think when you're that much older than your teenage bride, you have to wonder, when is she going to start questioning the relationship and the age difference?
And Stacy starts fantasizing about a future beyond the virtual prison of her home with Drew. But what price will she have to pay for those dreams? Stacy's life is in a rut, and in the fall of 2007, she attempts to break out.
As the kids were getting older, Stacy sort of wanted something for herself. She went to community college. She wanted to become a nurse.
She enjoys the classes and the chance to socialize after spending years taking care of her 4 children.
She was reconnecting with people from her past, including the brother of an old boyfriend of hers.
I'm having a good time.
But Drew tells Stacy to stay away from him
I have to go. Sorry, Drew's home.
and begins monitoring her text messages and emails.
Drew was especially overbearing and controlling when it came to Stacy and what she was saying to other people. So he really tried to monitor the situation as closely as he could.
Nothing seems to alleviate Drew's anxiety, and deep down, Stacy knows that Drew is really worried about more than just her infidelity. For years, Stacy has been keeping a secret that's haunted her, but she won't keep it for much longer. Distressed at the state of her marriage, Stacy seeks out her church's pastor and asks to meet him.
Drew and Stacy had gone to a large church in Bolingbrook and had begun talking with a pastor there named Neil Shorey. She called him and asked if they could meet to talk.
When Stacy reached out to Neil Shorey, she was getting ready to leave Drew. She was ready to go. Around the same time, she met with a divorce attorney.
Stacy asks him to keep their discussion confidential, and he agrees. Not long after her meeting with the pastor, Stacy makes plans with her sister and their family.
On the morning of October 28th, 2007, Stacy was supposed to go help family members paint a house, and she never showed up.
Stacy, where are you?
Cassandra is immediately concerned and calls Drew to find out where she is. But Drew claims to have no idea where Stacy might be and tells Cassandra that he's out looking for her too. After years of living in a strange relationship, Drew Peterson's 4th wife has just gone missing, and the police are left to figure out if Stacy fled her troubled marriage or fell victim to a brutal crime. "23-year-old Stacy Peterson plans to meet her sister on the morning of October 28th, 2007.
She never showed up. She never called. She never told anyone she wasn't coming.
Stacy, where are you?
Cassandra immediately got worried. She'd been trying to reach Stacy all day on her cell phone, and Stacy's cell phone was turned off.
Cassandra calls Stacy's husband, Drew, who tells her that Stacy took off.
Drew said that Stacy had called, said she's found somebody else, and that she's leaving.
But Cassandra isn't convinced.
Immediately, the story made no sense to Cassandra. There was no way Stacy was going to leave their 4 kids to fend for themselves.
Unable to find Stacy, her sister goes to the police.
So many warning bells went off in Cassandra's mind that she went to the police department and filed a missing persons report.
The report launches a massive search for Stacy, and the media quickly takes an interest in the police sergeant's young wife.
3 days before Stacy Peterson was reported missing, her sister Cassandra.
Amid all the searching for Stacy and all the volunteers who are out passing out flyers or combing through fields, Drew is going about Drew's life. He's raising his kids. He's becoming sort of a national pop culture figure. He's appearing on all these television shows.
Investigators issue a plea for anyone with information to come forward. And just days later, they get a tip. The pastor who provided Stacy with marriage counseling contacts police. Deeply troubled by news of Stacy's disappearance, he has information which may be of use. He says Stacy came to see him months before she vanished, and in the strictest confidence, revealed a secret she'd been hiding for years.
Stacy told Pastor Shorey that on the weekend of Kathleen's death, she awoke in the middle of the night to find Drew missing. She went downstairs and saw him putting women's clothing into their washing machine, and the clothing did not belong to her.
Whose laundry are you doing right now?
Nobody's. Come on. Let's go back to bed.
She said that Drew was dressed all in black, and the sleeves of his black shirt were also wet.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist when you look at the description. What she's saying that Drew came home after killing Kathy.
Her state of mind was terrible.
Drew then coached her for hours on what police would ask her about his whereabouts that night, and he coached her to lie. Basically, Drew coached her on how to provide his alibi for the night of Kathleen's death.
Believing that Drew killed Kathleen, Stacy lived in fear before she disappeared. It's damning evidence that focuses the investigation squarely on Drew.
Drew did not get any of the courtesies that he received in the Kathleen Savio death investigation. They started investigating him hard. I think the Illinois State Police weren't willing to look at this as an unfortunate, unlucky turn for Drew once again.
In light of the revelation, investigators decide to take a second look at Kathleen's death.
They secured a court order so they could exhume her grave, dig up her body, so they could conduct additional post-mortem testing on her remains.
The examination yields shocking results.
Kathleen Savio had injuries on both sides of her body, as well as the back and the front, that couldn't happen in a single fall. She must have fallen numerous times and hit all these different points of her body during a series of maybe a dozen falls, and not just one single fall in a bathtub.
Dr. Bloom's report was that it was a homicide.
Drew is now the prime suspect in his third wife's death and his fourth wife's disappearance.
When was the last time you saw Stacy?
Drew was questioned once again by the Illinois State Police.
I think everyone in town, media and law enforcement-wise, thought it was a game changer, but Drew didn't act like it was a game changer. I mean, he continued to be sort of the cocky, spotlight-hungry jokester.
Drew maintains his innocence, and investigators have their work cut out for them.
They're looking at sort of an uphill battle. They only have hearsay and circumstantial evidence.
Months go by, and there's still no sign of Stacy. Investigators concentrate their efforts on getting justice for Kathleen, interviewing multiple witnesses in the process. And in May 2009, they finally make an arrest.
He's arrested at a routine traffic stop. As they're putting him in handcuffs, he makes a joke about, oh, did I forget to return some library books?
Can you beat it? The charge was first-degree murder of Kathleen Savio, for which they set a bail of $20 million.
On July 31st, 2012, over 3 years after his arrest, Drew Peterson goes on trial for Kathleen's murder. And Stacy's pastor is the prosecution's star witness.
The prosecution had to rely on Neil Shorey to tell them what Stacy confided in him.
Unable to speak on her own behalf, Stacy is given voice through the testimony of her pastor. It helps construct what may have happened to Kathleen on the night she died. It's alleged that Drew went to Kathleen's home and attacked her, causing her traumatic injuries and eventually drowning her. He then placed her in the bathtub to make it appear as though she'd fallen. But there are conflicting reports as to what actually killed Kathleen.
To this day, some of the jurors say, well, we don't know how she died. We just know that she was killed in that bathtub and Drew had the means and the motives. And Stacy's hearsay backed that up.
The defense makes the most of the ambiguity around the manner of Kathleen's death.
The defense relied upon their own scientific experts who said that this could be an accidental drowning, that you can't convict Drew because we don't even know for sure if it was a murder.
On September 6, 2012, after a 24-day trial and 14 hours of deliberation, Drew Peterson is convicted of first-degree murder. Drew's reaction to the verdict doesn't come as a surprise.
You know, I was sitting right next to Drew. He first turns to me and says, what are you going to do when they have a stacked deck? His reaction being, it's a totally unfair process.
And although Drew takes the verdict lightly, the case leaves a devastating tragedy in its wake.
These kids are really the victims here, especially, you know, Kathleen Savio's 2 children. They lost 2 moms in very close succession and then saw their father go to jail.
Stacy Peterson is presumed dead, but no remains have ever been recovered.
Drew doesn't care really about anybody other than himself. He wants to be treated as this very important, powerful man, which is indicative of somebody who's narcissistic. Drew really is a control freak. There are a lot of things that are going to be out of your control that enraged him, and he dealt with that in a very dangerous and homicidal way.
The South Pacific is often romanticized in the collective imagination as a boundless expanse of tranquil blue waters, pristine coral reefs, and idyllic islands where time seems to slow down to the gentle rhythm of the ocean tides. Among these isolated paradises lies American Samoa, an unincorporated territory of the United States, a place defined by its profound natural beauty and its deep, unyielding connection to ancient traditions. On the main island of Tutuila, volcanic peaks covered in lush, impenetrable emerald rainforests slope down toward narrow coastal plains, where small villages rest right at the edge of the sea. In these tight-knit communities, the concept of anonymity does not exist. Every face is familiar, every lineage is intertwined, and every dispute is typically absorbed and resolved by the collective embrace of the village structure. Violence, especially of the lethal and explosive variety so often seen in the mainland United States, is historically an anomaly here. It is a place where the cultural fabric is designed specifically to prevent the loss of control, making the events that unfolded in the village of Amalia in the spring of 1986 not just a tragedy, but a profound cultural rupture that shattered the illusion of perpetual peace. Amalia is situated on the western side of Tutuila, a small, quiet coastal enclave that, in the mid-1980s, felt entirely removed from the complications of the modern world. Life in Amalia was dictated by the sun, the sea, and the Fa Samoa, the traditional Samoan way of life. This ancient socio-political framework places immense value on family, respect for elders, and communal harmony. At the center of this system are the Matai, the village chiefs who serve as the patriarchs, mediators, and ultimate authorities in any local conflict. For generations, if a dispute arose over land, minor grievances, or youthful transgressions, the Matai would convene. Through deliberate conversation, ceremonial apologies, and the heavy weight of social expectation, conflicts were de-escalated. The system provided a psychological safety net, a guarantee that no matter how heated tempers might get, there was always a structured, deeply respected mechanism to pull people back from the brink of irreversible harm. But on the night of April 12, 1986, this ancient safety net fundamentally failed, exposing a fragile vulnerability in the face of modern pressures, generational friction, and the chaotic influence of heavy intoxication. To understand the sheer horror of what happened, one must first understand the suffocating atmosphere of that specific night. In a village without the harsh glare of urban streetlights, darkness in Amaluya is absolute. When the sun dips below the Pacific horizon, the night swallows the landscape entirely. The only illumination comes from the scattered, dim lights of homes and the faint glow of the moon, should it manage to pierce through the heavy, humid tropical clouds. The air in April is thick, heavy with moisture and the salty scent of the ocean, creating an environment that can feel incredibly stifling. The ambient noise is usually limited to the relentless, rhythmic crashing of waves against the shoreline and the rustling of palm fronds. But on this particular night, the natural symphony of the island was violently disrupted by the chaotic, escalating sounds of human hostility. The catalyst for this unraveling did not stem from a calculated, premeditated conspiracy, nor was it the climax of a long-standing, deep-seated blood feud. Instead, it was born from the reckless, explosive energy of youth and a catastrophic lack of judgment. A group of local young men, including Taysale Nelson, Tuafanua Tetuna, and Ropati Hicks, had gathered that evening. They were sons of the island, deeply woven into the fabric of the community, individuals who under normal circumstances would be expected to uphold the respect and dignity demanded by their heritage. However, on this evening, the boundaries of tradition were dissolved by the consumption of a massive quantity of alcohol. A prolonged drinking session, fueled by heavy liquor and beer, began to strip away their inhibitions. As the hours passed and the alcohol saturated their systems, the mood shifted from festive camaraderie to a dark, agitated belligerence. The generational divide between the restless youth and the quiet expectations of the older villagers began to manifest as a tangible, dangerous tension in the humid night air. The victims of the impending tragedy were not entirely innocent bystanders in the events leading up to the violence, a fact that adds a layer of complex tragedy to the narrative. Taysale Nelson, Tuafanua Tetuna, and Ropati Hicks were caught in a spiral of intoxication that blinded them to the consequences of their actions. As the night deepened into the early hours of April 13th, minor, perhaps completely insignificant grievances between this intoxicated group and other residents of the village began to flare up. What started as loud, drunken bravado quickly escalated into a physical display of aggression. The peaceful silence of Amaluya was broken by the harsh, abrasive sounds of shouting, the aggressive stomping of feet, and the terrifying noise of stones being hurled through the darkness. The rocks struck the corrugated tin roofs and wooden walls of neighboring houses, echoing like erratic drumbeats of impending doom. Inside those homes, families woke up in a state of sudden, disorienting panic. The sheer terror of being jolted awake in the pitch-black night by an unseen, violent mob outside one's door cannot be overstated. But the youths did not stop at throwing stones. The intoxicating combination of alcohol and unchecked adrenaline pushed them further across the line of acceptable behavior, leading them to commit an act that strikes at the very heart of survival in a rural village setting. They engaged in a primitive, terrifying attempt at arson. In a community where homes are constructed closely together, often using highly flammable materials, fire is an existential threat. The youths attempted to ignite a residential structure, a brazen assault on the safety and property of their own neighbors. The sight of flames licking at the darkness, however primitive the attempt might have been, fundamentally altered the reality of the night. It was no longer a case of young men being overly loud and disrespectful. It was a direct, life-threatening assault on the sanctuary of the village. The scent of smoke began to mix with the smell of the ocean, signaling that the situation had spiraled completely out of the control of normal social constraints. It is in this crucible of fear, noise, and fire that the figure of Pio Tasosi emerges into the narrative. Pio was a middle-aged man, a resident of Amaluya who, like everyone else, had been abruptly awakened by the chaos unfolding outside his door. He belonged to a generation that implicitly trusted the Fa Samoa, a man who would normally defer to the Matai to handle unruly youths. But the circumstances of this night were extraordinary. The village elders were not present to intervene. The modern police force was miles away, and the threat was immediate, loud, and incredibly destructive. As Pio watched from the shadows of his home, he witnessed the sanctity of his village being torn apart. He saw the rocks raining down, he heard the aggressive taunts of the young men, and he saw the horrifying glint of fire threatening to consume the properties around him. The psychological state of a person pushed to their absolute breaking point is a complex web of terror and rage. Pio Tasosi was not a hardened criminal. He was a villager whose primary instinct was self-preservation and the protection of his immediate surroundings. As he observed the drunken rampage of Taysale Nelson, Tuafanua Tatuna, Ropati Hicks, and the others, a profound sense of helplessness washed over him. The traditional mechanisms of his culture felt entirely inadequate in the face of this immediate, fiery violence. The youths had abandoned reason, and in Pio's mind, they had transformed from wayward sons of the village into an active, destructive force that needed to be stopped by any means necessary. The fear of losing his home, coupled with the visceral anger of seeing his community terrorized, created a perfect storm within his mind. The rational thought process, the instinct to call for help or to seek a peaceful mediation, evaporated. It was replaced by a primal, overwhelming urge to neutralize the threat. The tragedy of the Amalia massacre lies in this exact moment of decision, the fatal pivot from enduring a terrifying situation to taking lethal action. The isolation of the island meant that the residents often relied on themselves for survival, and part of that survival included the possession of tools and weapons meant for hunting and agriculture. Inside Pio Taososi's home, resting in the quiet dark, was a weapon designed for immense, devastating power. As the noise outside reached a fever pitch, as the glow of the arson attempt illuminated the faces of the aggressive youths, Pio made a choice that would permanently alter the history of American Samoa. He stepped away from the window, turning his back on the chaos for just a brief moment, and moved deliberately into the depths of his house to retrieve a large-caliber shotgun. This was not a weapon designed for precision. It was a tool of massive, spread destruction, capable of ending life in a fraction of a second. The story of what happened next is a harrowing descent into the darkest corners of human reaction. It is a narrative that forces us to examine the fragility of peace and the terrifying consequences when the bonds of community are severed by intoxication and fear. The young men, lost in their alcoholic frenzy, had no idea that their actions had pushed a desperate man past the point of no return. They continued their rampage in the suffocating darkness, completely unaware that the shadows just a few yards away now concealed a lethal, uncompromising force. The stage was set in the stifling, humid night of Amaluya, a village teetering on the edge of an abyss. The rocks continued to fall, the fire flickered, and the ancient traditions of the island stood completely powerless against the imminent, devastating roar of modern weaponry that was about to shatter the night, leaving a legacy of blood and a permanent scar on the soul of a peaceful island. The physical sensation of holding a large-caliber shotgun changes a man in a moment of intense crisis, shifting the dynamic from helpless vulnerability to absolute, lethal authority. As Pio Tasosi gripped the cold steel and heavy wooden stock of the weapon, the chaotic noises outside his home seemed to flatten into a single, localized threat that demanded an immediate response. He did not pause to count the shells or to contemplate the severe legal and cultural consequences that would inevitably follow if he crossed the line into deadly force. The weapon he carried was a tool traditionally reserved for clearing the dense tropical undergrowth of wild animals, an instrument designed to inflict maximum tissue damage through a wide, unpredictable spread of lead pellets. In the context of a peaceful village like Amaluya, the introduction of such a firearm into a localized dispute was equivalent to declaring an absolute war against the very people he had known since their childhood. Pio moved through the dim interior of his house, guided by the erratic, flickering light of the small fire the youths had set outside, his heart hammering against his ribs as adrenaline completely overrode his capacity for rational thought. Outside, the intoxicated group of young men remained entirely oblivious to the lethal escalation occurring just yards away behind the wooden walls of Pio's residence. Taysale Nelson, Tuafanua Tetuna, and Ropati Hicks were completely consumed by the momentum of their own aggression, their senses severely dulled by the massive quantities of beer and hard liquor they had consumed over the preceding hours. To them, the night was an exercise in unchecked power, an opportunity to vent frustrations and assert dominance over a community that usually demanded strict obedience and humility. They continued to shout obscenities into the humid air, their voices hoarse, while their hands gathered more stones to hurl against the properties of their neighbors. The primitive fire they had ignited cast long, distorted shadows across the dirt paths and vegetation, creating a surreal and terrifying atmosphere that made the small village look more like a battlefield than a sanctuary. They did not hear the distinct, heavy click of a shotgun mechanism being prepared for firing, a sound that should have served as the ultimate warning to disperse. When Pio Tasosi stepped out onto the dark, unlit veranda of his home, the heavy tropical air hit him like a physical wall, but his focus remained locked on the figures moving through the shadows. The absolute darkness of Amaluyo away from the immediate vicinity of the fire made it incredibly difficult to distinguish individual faces, or to assess whether any of the youths were carrying weapons more dangerous than rocks. To a man consumed by terror and rage, however, every silhouette in that yard represented an imminent threat to his life, his family, and his home. Pio did not issue a loud command to halt, nor did he fire a warning shot into the sky to scare the intruders away and give them a chance to retreat into the safety of the night. Instead, he raised the heavy barrel of the shotgun, leveled it directly at the center of the chaotic mass of human shapes illuminated by the flickering flames, and pulled the trigger with a calculated, desperate finality. The explosion of the shotgun blast took the silence of the Pacific night with a deafening roar that completely obliterated the sounds of shouting and crashing stones. A brilliant, momentary flash of gunpowder illuminated the veranda, casting a stark, white light over Pio's strained features before plunging the scene back into an even deeper, disorienting darkness. The discharge of a large-caliber shotgun at close range releases a devastating cloud of lead pellets that spreads outward in a deadly cone, tearing through anything in its path with terrifying kinetic energy. The force of the blast was so immense that it echoed off the volcanic hills surrounding Amaluya, alerting residents hundreds of yards away that something catastrophic had just occurred in the heart of their community. For a fraction of a second after the report of the weapon died down, there was a terrible, breathless silence as the physical reality of the damage began to manifest in the darkness. Taysale Nelson was standing at the absolute vanguard of the group, completely exposed and situated at the most vulnerable CULY from the muzzle of Pio's firearm. The lead chum projectiles struck his body with full force, concentrated heavily in his upper torso, head, and chest area, where the vital organs reside. The sheer kinetic impact of the blast threw him backward onto the dirt, his body absorbing a level of trauma that made survival impossible from the very first millisecond. The pellets shredded muscle tissue, shattered bone, and punctured his heart, causing an instantaneous cessation of life before he even had the capacity to understand that he had been targeted. He collapsed into the shadows, his body completely still, becoming the first and most tragic casualty of a night defined by an absolute failure of human restraint. Standing just a few feet away from Nelson, wrapped in the same pocket of darkness, were Tuafanua Tetuna and Ropati Hicks, both of whom were instantly caught in the wider perimeter of the shotgun's devastating spread. While they did not absorb the direct, concentrated center of the blast like Nelson, the erratic trajectory of the lead pellets inflicted horrific injuries upon their bodies. Tuafanua was struck heavily in the abdominal region and lower extremities, the sharp fragments of metal tearing through his skin and lodging deep within his abdomen, causing excruciating pain and immediate internal bleeding. Ropati Hicks was similarly lacerated, his legs taking the brunt of the lower spread as he instinctively tried to turn away from the sudden flash of light. Both young men collapsed to the ground alongside their fallen companion, their aggressive bravado instantly replaced by a visceral, overwhelming agony as they clutched their bleeding wounds in the dirt. The immediate aftermath of the shooting devolved into a scene of pure, unadulterated horror that the village of Amaluya had never experienced in its modern existence. The darkness was no longer filled with the sounds of drunken rebellion, but rather with the guttural, high-pitched screams of the wounded men as they lay incapacitated near the body of Taysale Nelson. The surrounding houses, which had been silent and dark just moments before, suddenly erupted with activity as terrified families realized that real ammunition had been used in their yards. Lights flickered on in nearby structures, casting weak beams of illumination across the grass, revealing the true extent of the carnage to the horrified onlookers who ventured out onto their doorsteps. Dazed villagers looked on in disbelief as they saw 3 of their young men broken and bleeding on the ground, while Pio Tasosi stood on his porch, the barrel of his shotgun still radiating a faint wisps of acrid smoke into the night air. The psychological transition of the village from a state of defensive panic to one of deep, collective shock occurred in the minutes following the gunfire. Neighbors and relatives of both the victims and the shooter rushed toward the scene, navigating the darkness with flashlights and lanterns, their feet slipping on the dew-damp grass as they approached the bodies. The initial instinct of the community was to provide primitive first aid to Tuafanua and Ropati, whose groans of pain filled the air, while a few elders approached the completely motionless form of Taysale Nelson. It took only a brief examination to realize that Nelson was gone, his pulse non-existent, his eyes staring blankly into the night sky above Tutuila. The realization that a murder had occurred within the boundaries of their own village sent a wave of physical nausea through the crowd, as the taboo of taking a fellow villager's life was one of the most profound transgressions in Samoan culture. As the crowd swelled and the immediate danger subsided, the attention of the village elders shifted toward the perpetrator of the violence, who remained on the scene as the adrenaline began to leave his system. Pio Tasosi did not attempt to flee into the dense, mountainous rainforest that rose up sharply behind the village, nor did he turn the weapon on the gathering crowd to secure his escape. The physical reality of what he had done seemed to crash down upon him all at once, draining the anger from his body and leaving him in a state of catatonic shock. He allowed the village men to approach him and easily stripped the large-caliber shotgun from his hands without offering a single shred of physical resistance. The weapon was set aside as a piece of grim evidence, and Pio was forced to sit on the ground, surrounded by his neighbors, awaiting the arrival of the authorities from the capital, his mind completely broken by the realization that he had just destroyed multiple lives, including his own. The physical isolation of Amalia meant that the arrival of professional medical and law enforcement personnel from Pago Pago would take a considerable amount of time, leaving the village to manage the immediate crisis on its own terms. In those dark, agonizing hours before the sun began to rise over the eastern horizon, the community had to confront the raw reality of the tragedy without the structural buffer of the state. The wounded men, Tuafanua and Ropati, were kept as stable as possible, their wounds wrapped in clean cloths that quickly soaked through with crimson stains, while the body of Taysale Nelson was covered with a traditional woven mat out of respect. The elders stood vigil in the darkness, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about how this event would completely fracture the delicate social equilibrium of the village for generations to come, knowing that the legal system of the United States was about to descend upon their traditional world with uncompromising force. The physical geography of Tutuila Island dictates the pace of every human endeavor, and on the morning of April 13th, it dictated the speed of justice and medical salvation. The distance between the central police headquarters in the capital village of Pago Pago and the isolated western coastal enclave of Amaluya is not measured merely in miles, but in the treacherous, winding nature of the coastal roads that hug the dramatic volcanic cliffs dropping straight into the Pacific Ocean. When the panicked radio calls finally reached the dispatchers in the capital, detailing a mass shooting with multiple casualties, the sheer logistical nightmare of deploying a modern forensic and medical response to such a remote location became immediately apparent. Police cruisers and rudimentary emergency medical vehicles had to navigate sharp, unlit curves, enveloped by the dense, suffocating canopy of the tropical rainforest on one side and the sheer drop to the churning sea on the other. The officers dispatched to the scene were accustomed to responding to minor domestic disputes, petty theft, or alcohol-fueled brawls that were typical of the island's historically low crime rate, making the prospect of a multiple-victim gunshot scenario an entirely unprecedented and deeply unsettling reality. As the convoy of flashing red and blue lights tore through the oppressive darkness of the pre-dawn hours, the physical journey mirrored the psychological transition the island was about to undergo, moving from the quiet, predictable rhythm of traditional village life into the harsh, clinical, and unforgiving machinery of the American criminal justice system. The officers gripped their steering wheels tightly, their minds racing through tactical protocols that had rarely, if ever, been utilized in the field, preparing themselves for a scene of unimaginable violence that completely contradicted the profound serenity of the Polynesian landscape surrounding them. When law enforcement personnel finally breached the perimeter of Amalia, they were met with a scene that resembled the chaotic aftermath of a localized war zone rather than a sleeping tropical village. The flickering lights of police cruisers cast long, disorienting shadows across the faces of the terrified residents who had gathered on the periphery of the Ta'asosi property, their expressions a mixture of profound grief and absolute bewilderment. The immediate priority of the responding officers was the preservation of life and the secure containment of the suspect, a task made immensely difficult by the sheer number of highly emotional villagers milling about the unlit, uneven terrain. Officers quickly established a perimeter, pushing back the weeping relatives of the victims and the deeply shaken neighbors, while paramedics rushed toward the groaning forms of Tuafanua Teituna and Ropati Hicks, who were still bleeding heavily into the damp soil of the yard. The medical personnel worked frantically under the inadequate illumination of heavy-duty flashlights, applying pressure to the devastating shrapnel wounds caused by the shotgun blast, fighting against the clock and the severe blood loss that threatened to claim 2 more young lives. The process of loading the shattered bodies of the survivors onto stretchers and securing them inside the cramped ambulances was fraught with an agonizing desperation, as every bump and jolt on the uneven dirt path elicited horrific cries of pain from the incapacitated men. As the ambulances finally sped away, beginning the long, perilous journey back to the Lyndon B. Johnson Tropical Medical Center, the remaining officers turned their full attention to the grim reality left behind in the grass, the motionless body of Taysale Nelson and the completely silent, emotionally vacant figure of the man who had pulled the trigger. Pio Ta'asosi offered absolutely no resistance as the arresting officers approached him, his demeanor devoid of the manic, desperate energy that had fueled his deadly actions just a few hours prior. He allowed the heavy steel handcuffs to be fastened securely around his wrists without uttering a single syllable in his defense, his eyes locked in a vacant stare that seemed to look right through the men taking him into federal custody. The large-caliber shotgun, the instrument of mass devastation that had permanently altered the trajectory of the village, was carefully secured as the primary piece of physical evidence, its wooden stock and cold metal barrel sealed inside a heavy evidence bag to preserve any latent fingerprints, gunshot residue, or trace materials. Once the suspect was secured in the back of a police cruiser and transported away from the volatile emotional atmosphere of the village, the grueling, meticulous work of processing a complex homicide scene in the absolute dark began. Crime scene investigators, equipped with portable floodlights powered by noisy, gasoline-driven generators, systematically illuminated the yard, revealing the stark, horrifying details of the violence. The harsh artificial light exposed the large pools of coagulating blood soaking into the tropical grass, the scattered, jagged rocks the youths had used as projectiles, and the charred, smoking remnants of the primitive arson attempt that had served as the terrifying catalyst for the shooting. Investigators meticulously placed bright yellow evidence markers next to every discarded item, every droplet of blood, and, most crucially, the spent shotgun shells that had been violently ejected from Pio's weapon, each brass and plastic casing telling a silent, undeniable story of lethal intent and precise spatial positioning. The physical evidence gathered from the damp soil of Amalia painted a grim, uncompromising picture of extreme violence that would later become the cornerstone of the prosecution's legal strategy against Pio Taososi. The forensic analysis of the crime scene indicated that the shooter had not fired a single warning shot into the air or into the ground to deter the intoxicated youths, but had instead leveled the weapon directly at center mass, maximizing the potential for catastrophic human injury. This narrative was heavily corroborated by the preliminary medical reports coming from the hospital, where trauma surgeons worked exhaustively to stabilize Tuifanua and Ropati, extracting numerous deformed lead pellets from their deep muscle tissues and internal cavities during hours of emergency surgery. However, the most damning piece of forensic evidence came from the coroner's post-mortem examination of Taysale Nelson, whose autopsy revealed the absolute, overwhelming lethality of a close-range shotgun blast. The medical examiner meticulously documented the massive structural damage to Nelson's chest cavity, noting how the clustered projectiles had pulverized bone and entirely compromised the major circulatory organs, confirming conclusively that the young man's death was instantaneous and medically irreversible. The clinical, highly detached language of the autopsy report stood in stark, jarring contrast to the immense, immeasurable emotional void left in the village by the violent extraction of one of its beloved sons, reducing a complex human life to a series of devastating entry wounds and catastrophic internal hemorrhages. The sheer volume of forensic data collected by the territorial authorities left absolutely no room for ambiguity regarding the physical mechanics of the incident, solidly establishing that Pio had utilized a weapon of immense power with a devastating degree of accuracy despite the blinding darkness of the night. While the physical evidence was being cataloged and analyzed by forensic specialists, the psychological and legal battle was just beginning inside the sterile, windowless interrogation rooms of the Central Police Headquarters in Pago Pago. Investigators sat across a cold metal table from Pio Taososi, attempting to peel back the heavy layers of shock and trauma to uncover the exact cognitive process that had led a previously law-abiding villager to commit such a horrific act of violence. Pio, speaking in low, exhausted tones, did not attempt to deny his role in the shooting, readily admitting that his finger had pulled the trigger and that the deadly shotgun belonged to his household. However, his narrative of the tragic events was heavily filtered through the lens of absolute, blinding fear, a desperate attempt to frame the slaughter not as a malicious, premeditated murder, but as a tragic necessity born from a completely uncontrollable situation. He recounted the terrifying sounds of the heavy rocks hitting his home, the aggressive, drunken shouting of the violent youths, and the heart-stopping sight of fire threatening to consume everything he owned, painting a vivid picture of a man who genuinely believed his life and the lives of his family were in immediate, mortal peril. The detectives listened carefully, recognizing that they were dealing with a profound cultural and psychological contradiction, a man who believed he had executed a necessary defense of his sanctuary, but who had done so by employing a level of disproportionate, lethal force that the modern legal system strictly and unequivocally prohibited. Pio's lengthy confession was a messy, deeply emotional admission of guilt mixed with a stubborn, underlying conviction that he had been left with absolutely no other viable option in the face of violent, fiery chaos. The most complex and entirely unique aspect of the criminal investigation did not stem from the gathering of physical evidence or the exhaustive interrogation of the suspect, but rather from the intense, profound friction between the deeply rooted cultural traditions of American Samoa and the rigid, unyielding statutes of federal criminal law. In the agonizing days following the massacre, as the initial shock began to gradually subside and the grim reality of a long, brutal trial loomed over the territory, the traditional village structures attempted to assert their ancient authority over the devastating situation. The Matai, the highly respected chiefs and elders of the affected families and the village of Amalia, sought to urgently initiate the process of ifoga, a deeply sacred, highly emotional ceremonial apology that involves the family of the perpetrator publicly humbling themselves before the family of the victim to beg for forgiveness and offer substantial compensation. In the rich historical context of the island, a successful ifoga would serve as the ultimate, definitive resolution to the conflict, preventing retaliatory blood feuds, restoring the spiritual harmony of the damaged community and theoretically negating the absolute need for further institutional punishment. The families involved, desperate to heal the gaping emotional wound in their community and avoid the shameful, public spectacle of a Western-style adversarial courtroom, desperately wanted to resolve the matter entirely internally through their ancestral customs, believing strongly that true justice could only be achieved through communal reconciliation rather than cold, institutional incarceration behind prison walls. However, the American Samoa government and the territorial prosecutors found themselves in a difficult, uncompromising position where they absolutely could not yield to the traditional demands of the village elders, setting the stage for a monumental, historic clash between two entirely different philosophies of justice. The office of the prosecutor maintained firmly that while the cultural practices of the FA Samoa were deeply respected and fundamentally integral to the identity of the island, they simply could not supersede the core, fundamental laws governing homicide and the necessary preservation of public safety within a United States territory. A multiple victim shooting involving a firearm of that devastating magnitude was viewed as simply too severe, too intentionally violent, and too destructive to be swept away by a ceremonial apology, no matter how profoundly sincere or historically significant that traditional ritual might be. The legal authorities argued passionately that allowing Pio Tasosi to completely avoid the formal justice system would set a highly dangerous, irreversible precedent, essentially signaling to the public that lethal violence could be legally excused if the traditional protocols of forgiveness were strictly followed, a concept that completely undermined the foundational authority of the modern state. This bureaucratic refusal to step aside and allow tradition to take its course generated a massive wave of profound sorrow and deep frustration across the island, as the villagers realized that the control over their own community's moral destiny had been entirely stripped away by the rigid, unfeeling mechanics of Western jurisprudence. The exhaustive investigation phase concluded not just with a comprehensive dossier of forensic evidence and a signed, recorded confession, but with a deeply fractured, traumatized society standing on the precipice of a tense courtroom drama that threatened to permanently alter the cultural and legal landscape of the tropical island. The legal proceedings against Pio Tasosi transitioned from the quiet, grieving atmosphere of Amaluia into the austere, intimidating environment of the High Court of American Samoa in Pago Pago, a transformation that brought with it a jarring shift in focus from ancestral reconciliation to the cold, analytical rigors of the adversarial justice system. As the trial officially commenced, the courtroom became the primary battleground where the two competing interpretations of the night's tragedy were presented to the judiciary. The prosecution, representing the formal state apparatus, approached the case with a singular, unyielding objective: to demonstrate that the events of April 13, 1986, were not an act of reasonable self-defense, but an egregious, criminal deviation from the social contract. Lead prosecutors presented the forensic findings with clinical precision, utilizing the expert testimony of ballistic specialists who explained the physics of the shotgun blast in excruciating detail. They argued that the sheer, overwhelming power of the weapon used, combined with the lack of any warning or attempt to de-escalate the situation, invalidated any claims of proportionality in the defendant's actions. The prosecution's case was built on the premise that regardless of the provocation caused by the intoxicated youths, no individual in a civilized territory possesses the legal right to execute summary justice in the darkness of their own home. They emphasized the irreversible tragedy of Taysale Nelson's death, presenting the autopsy report not merely as a document of medical facts, but as a profound testament to the irreversible loss of a young life, a strategy intended to keep the emotional cost of the crime at the forefront of the jury's consciousness throughout the entirety of the lengthy trial. The defense, conversely, attempted to construct a much more complex and nuanced narrative, one that was deeply rooted in the realities of life in the remote village of Amaluia and the intense, paralyzing fear that defined Pio Tasosi's perspective on that harrowing night. Their legal strategy rested on the concept of temporary, situational insanity brought on by an extreme, unavoidable external threat, combined with an intense assertion of the right to protect one's dwelling and kin from active, life-threatening aggression. Defense attorneys brought forward character witnesses from the village who described Pio as a quiet, hardworking, and deeply respectful man who had never demonstrated any history of prior violence or aggressive behavior toward his neighbors. These testimonies were designed to portray him as an unlikely criminal, a man who had been pushed past his psychological breaking point by the unchecked, drunken rampage of the youths who had targeted his property with rocks and fire. The defense meticulously cross-examined the survivors, Tuafanua Tetuna and Ropati Hicks, focusing heavily on the chaotic, threatening nature of their own behavior leading up to the shooting, attempting to shift the perception of the incident from a cold-blooded murder to a frantic, reflexive reaction to an ongoing, volatile, and terrifying assault. They argued that in the absolute darkness of an isolated village, without the immediate presence of police protection, Pio was forced to act on a primal instinct for survival, and that the resulting tragedy was a consequence of the terrifying environment he had been thrust into, rather than a conscious, criminal intent to take the life of Taysale Nelson. The courtroom atmosphere was consistently thick with palpable tension, as the trial became a public stage for the conflicting moral and cultural values that were currently pulling the society of American Samoa in two opposing directions. Members of the victims' families and supporters of Pio Ta'asosi occupied separate sides of the public gallery, their silent, watchful presence serving as a constant, looming reminder of the community's deep division and the lingering trauma that had yet to find resolution. Each day of the trial was a draining, emotionally taxing exercise for everyone involved, as the intimate details of the shooting were dissected and, stripped of their traditional context, transformed into sterile, legalistic arguments that the villagers felt lacked any true understanding of their way of life. The defense team's most ambitious attempt to introduce the cultural significance of the ifoga into the courtroom as a mitigating factor was met with immediate, fierce, and sustained resistance from the prosecution. Prosecutors argued vehemently that the traditional ceremony was essentially an extrajudicial attempt to bypass the formal mechanisms of the state, and that allowing it to be presented as evidence of the defendant's remorse or as a valid pathway for resolution would irreparably damage the integrity of the judicial system. The presiding judge, tasked with the impossible weight of maintaining order amidst this fundamental clash of legal ideologies, ultimately maintained a narrow focus on the statutory requirements of criminal law, consistently instructing the jury to weigh the evidence solely on the basis of the facts presented rather than the complex, deeply rooted societal traditions that had been so cruelly broken on that April night. As the testimony progressed, the testimony of the surviving victims, Tuafanua and Ropati, proved to be particularly pivotal and emotionally gut-wrenching for everyone present in the courtroom. Having endured multiple, grueling surgeries to repair their damaged bodies and stabilize their physical conditions, the two young men were forced to recount the traumatic events of the evening while still bearing the visible scars of their injuries. Their presence on the witness stand, weakened and visibly traumatized, provided a visceral, human anchor to the prosecution's case that significantly undermined the defense's portrayal of Pio as a simple, misunderstood protector. They admitted to their own intoxication and their reckless, aggressive behavior, but they remained steadfast in their assertion that the force employed by the defendant was utterly disproportionate and catastrophic. Their vulnerability under cross-examination, as the defense attempted to cast them as the primary instigators of the night's violence, drew a powerful, empathetic reaction from the spectators, reinforcing the narrative that the price paid for their actions, the loss of their friend Taysale Nelson and the permanent trauma they now carried, was a punishment that far exceeded any rational, proportional justice. The prosecution expertly utilized their presence to pivot the focus of the jury away from the abstract, legalistic discussions of self-defense and toward the irreversible, physical reality of the devastation caused by the shotgun blast. The defense, however, was equally persistent in its focus on the psychological state of Pio Ta'asosi, bringing in expert psychiatric evaluations to analyze the defendant's frame of mind during the incident. These specialists discussed the physiological impact of extreme, sudden fear, the fight-or-flight response that, when triggered in an environment of total darkness and physical threat, can cause a normal, functioning individual to lose all capacity for nuanced, proportional decision-making. They argued that the defendant was not acting out of malice, but was caught in a tunnel of perception where he believed his family and home were on the precipice of total destruction, a state of mind that significantly diminished his culpability in the eyes of the law. The defense attorneys masterfully wove these psychological insights into their final arguments, asking the jury to view the event not from the safety and clarity of a courtroom, but from the perspective of a man alone, surrounded by shouting voices and the smell of smoke in a dark, rural yard. They emphasized the absence of any other realistic options for protection, suggesting that in that specific, isolated context, the line between reasonable defense and reflexive reaction had been completely erased by the overwhelming nature of the situation. This line of reasoning sought to evoke a sense of understanding and empathy from the jury, attempting to persuade them that the verdict should reflect the human reality of fear rather than the cold, mechanical application of statutes written in a different, safer world. The legal battle reached its zenith during the closing arguments, where both the prosecution and the defense offered final, compelling visions of how the jury should interpret the night's tragedy and what it meant for the future of the territory. The prosecution's closing statement was a powerful, rhythmic condemnation of the violence, painting the incident as a complete and utter betrayal of the communal peace that defined their identity as a people. They reminded the jury that the law exists specifically to prevent individuals from taking the life of another, even in times of extreme stress, and that a verdict of anything less than guilt would essentially grant permission for future, equally devastating outbreaks of vigilantism across the island. The defense's closing argument, by contrast, was a poignant, somber plea for mercy, asking the jury to look beyond the clinical definitions of homicide and recognize the deep, tragic complexity of a man who has pushed past the threshold of his human endurance. They appealed to the jury's sense of shared experience, asking them to consider the overwhelming weight of fear that would compel a father and neighbor to protect his home when the traditional structures of their society were completely absent and the threat felt absolute. The atmosphere in the courtroom during these final hours was heavy, almost suffocating, as the jurors sat in absolute, immobile silence, tasked with the monumental burden of balancing the demands of rigid law with the messy, deeply emotional realities of human nature. As the trial entered its final phase, the pressure mounted on the jury to navigate these complex, competing narratives, knowing that their verdict would not only dictate the fate of Pio Tasosi, but also send a definitive signal to the community regarding the limits of self-protection and the consequences of lethal violence in their shared home. The judge's instructions, a lengthy and detailed exposition of the legal criteria for murder, manslaughter, and the legal parameters of self-defense, provided a strict, inflexible framework within which the jury was required to deliberate, further narrowing the space for the cultural considerations that had so dominated the public discourse surrounding the case. The jury, comprised of local residents who were profoundly aware of the deep-seated impact of the crime on the small, interconnected village of Amaluya, were forced to set aside their own personal, cultural understandings of justice and instead adhere strictly to the American legal standards that governed their territory. The deliberative process behind the closed doors of the jury room became a microcosm of the trial itself, a concentrated, high-stakes reflection of the island's struggle to find a stable middle ground between its past and its future. The weight of their decision was immense, as they realized that no matter which way they ultimately decided, they would inevitably be leaving a segment of their community feeling unheard, misunderstood, and profoundly betrayed by a legal system that struggled to reconcile the ancient, traditional heart of their society with the unyielding, formal structures of the federal government that oversaw their administration. The final, agonizing hours of the jury's deliberation, in the dim, quiet halls of the courthouse, marked the end of the trial's active stage and the beginning of a period of permanent, lingering uncertainty for everyone whose lives had been irrevocably connected by the tragic, explosive event in the dark night of Amaluya. The return of the jury to the courtroom after their deliberations was a moment of profound, visceral tension that seemed to stretch the very air thin within the chamber, as every individual present understood that the verdict would serve as the definitive resolution to the long, grueling legal process that had dominated the territory's attention for months. The courtroom, usually a space of stoic legal formality, felt suddenly heavy with the accumulated emotional weight of the tragedy, as the families of the victims and the defendant braced themselves for a conclusion that they knew would be entirely final and yet completely insufficient to mend the fractures caused by the massacre. As the foreman stood to read the verdict, the silence was so absolute that the distant sound of the Pacific surf crashing against the cliffs seemed to intrude into the space, a haunting reminder of the peaceful reality that had been so violently discarded on that April night. The decision of the court was clear and uncompromising. The jury had rejected the defense's argument of temporary insanity and the nuanced claims of justified, reflexive self-defense in the face of an immediate, existential threat. Instead, they returned a verdict that aligned with the prosecution's core argument, determining that the defendant had, in fact, committed a serious crime of violence, establishing the legal reality that no amount of fear or external provocation could excuse the intentional application of lethal force against fellow members of the community. The sentencing phase of the trial followed shortly after the verdict, transforming the courtroom into a place of sober reflection on the nature of punishment and the requirements of social order in a society that was rapidly trying to bridge the gap between tradition and modern governance. The presiding judge, an individual tasked with the daunting responsibility of weighing the letter of the law against the complex, heartbreaking human context of the case, acknowledged the profound tragedy that had occurred in Amaluya. Recognizing that the destruction of Taysale Nelson's life and the permanent wounding of his friends had caused a level of pain that could never truly be assuaged by the mere imposition of a prison sentence. However, the judge remained equally steadfast in the assertion that the law in American Samoa must provide a reliable, predictable structure for the safety of its citizens, and that permitting such an act of extreme, weaponized vengeance would be a failure of the territory's responsibility to protect its people from internal violence. Consequently, the court handed down a severe, long-term sentence for P.O. Ta'asosi, a decision that essentially removed him from the community he had sought to protect, consigning him to years of incarceration within the Tafuna Correctional Facility, a place of confinement that stood in stark, brutal contrast to the open, communal life of the village he had left behind. The sentencing was met with a complex, muffled reaction from the gallery, as the realization of the defendant's permanent removal from his family and village life resonated deeply with those who had hoped for a more lenient, culturally integrated resolution to the tragedy. For the relatives of Taysale Nelson, the finality of the sentence provided a grim, necessary form of closure, an official validation that the loss of their loved one had been recognized by the state as a profound, inexcusable injustice. Yet, for many in the community, the outcome felt like the final, crushing blow to the traditional way of life, an indication that the ancient, restorative mechanisms of the FA Samoa were being systematically replaced by an uncompromising, Western adversarial system that prioritized punishment over genuine reconciliation. The departure of P.O. Ta'asosi from the courtroom, led away in iron shackles to begin his life behind bars, was a moment that signified the end of one chapter and the beginning of a long, uncertain future for the village of Amaluya, where the memory of that April night would remain etched into the social and physical consciousness of every resident for decades to come. Tafuna Correctional Facility, where the defendant was transported to serve his sentence, represented a different kind of reality for those navigating the territory's criminal justice system, a space of containment that stripped away the complexities of identity, lineage, and tradition, reducing the individual to a number within a highly regulated, monitored environment. The transition from the rural, chaotic setting of a coastal village to the predictable, restricted routines of a prison was an adjustment of immense psychological and emotional magnitude, forcing P.O. Ta'asosi to grapple with the daily, inescapable reality of his actions while surrounded by the very people he had once regarded as his neighbors and peers. The prison environment, characterized by its austere cells, narrow corridors, and the constant, rhythmic clanging of heavy steel doors, created a permanent, physical barrier between the perpetrator and the society he had irrevocably damaged. Within these walls, the nuanced narratives of fear, defense, and cultural pressure that had been so intensely debated in the courtroom lost their meaning, replaced by the simple, monotonous reality of life in confinement, where time was measured in the slow, agonizing progression of days and months spent contemplating a singular, irreversible mistake. The impact of the trial's outcome extended far beyond the immediate circle of the families and the defendant, acting as a catalyst for a broader, more difficult conversation across American Samoa regarding the intersection of modern legal requirements and the preservation of traditional social structures. The legal battle had highlighted a significant, persistent tension between the desire for communal harmony and the demands of state authority, leaving many to wonder if the existing system was truly capable of addressing the unique, delicate needs of their isolated, close-knit population. This uncertainty fostered a deep, contemplative mood across the island, as people struggled to reconcile their respect for the law with their desire to uphold the ancient, ancestral values that had sustained their people for generations. The trial had forced the territory to confront a fundamental, perhaps unanswerable question about what it means to be a modern society while remaining deeply, intrinsically rooted in a traditional, tribal history, a challenge that did not have a clear or immediate solution but required a sustained, difficult, and honest dialogue from the community leadership, the legal professionals, and the common citizens alike. The conclusion of the legal proceedings did not, however, mean the conclusion of the community's collective trauma, for the physical and emotional scars left by the massacre remained as constant, visible reminders of the events that had unfolded in the early hours of that April morning. The village of Amaluya, once defined by its absolute, tranquil peace, had been permanently altered by the violence, its landscape now inextricably linked to the site of the shooting, an area that many residents found difficult to approach without feeling a renewed, stinging sense of grief and profound disorientation. The young survivors, Tuafanua and Ropati, continued their long, grueling journey of physical and psychological recovery, their daily existence a constant, painful reminder of the friends they had lost and the night that had changed their lives forever. Their resilience, though admirable, was marked by the weight of the trauma they carried, a burden that few outsiders could ever truly comprehend or appreciate in its entirety, highlighting the enduring, long-term impact of a crime that extended far beyond the immediate, physical injury. The process of mourning was equally difficult for the family of Taysale Nelson, whose absence left a void that could never be filled, a quiet, lingering presence that permeated the lives of those he had left behind and ensured that the tragedy remained a focal point of their collective, shared history. As the months and years followed the trial's end, the village of Amaluya slowly began to rebuild, yet the shadow of the massacre continued to shape the way residents engaged with one another and with the institutions of the law. The once instinctive trust that had allowed the community to function with minimal external intervention had been deeply shaken, and in its place, a more cautious, guarded approach to social interactions emerged, as people became increasingly aware of the potential for conflict and the fragility of their communal peace. The role of the Matai, while still highly respected and central to the village life, had become increasingly complex as the elders navigated the reality of their limited authority in matters that touched upon the jurisdiction of the territory's formal courts. This evolution in the village's dynamics was a testament to the lasting, pervasive influence of the event, demonstrating how a single, explosive moment of violence could ripple through time, forever altering the way a community understood its own past and its place within a broader, rapidly changing world. The legal conclusion in Pago Pago may have officially ended the case against Pio Tasosi, but it could never truly terminate the ongoing, deeply personal narrative of the village's journey towards some form of stability and healing. The silence that had descended upon Amaluya in the aftermath of the trial was a heavy, contemplative one, reflecting a society that was still actively processing the immense, devastating cost of the night the peace was broken and the traditional order of their world was forever and irreversibly changed by the intrusion of violence. The long, agonizing aftermath of the Amaluya massacre left an indelible mark on the soul of American Samoa, serving as a permanent, cautionary reminder of how quickly the foundations of a peaceful, communal life can be shattered by a singular, catastrophic collapse of human judgment. As the years turned into decades, the event became embedded within the oral history of the island, a narrative passed down from the generation that witnessed the horror to the younger ones who inherited the complex, fractured reality that followed. The tragedy was no longer just a legal case or a headline in the local newspapers. It had become an integral, albeit deeply painful, part of the cultural landscape, a story that spoke to the inherent vulnerabilities of a society perched at the intersection of ancestral tradition and the rigid, uncompromising demands of federal law. This enduring memory served a dual purpose, functioning both as a profound expression of grief for the lives that were extinguished and as a constant, looming warning about the destructive capacity of unchecked fear and the irrevocable consequences of introducing lethal violence into the intimate, close-knit environment of a rural village. For those who still resided in Amalia, the physical location of the shooting remained a site of significant emotional weight, a place that anchored their collective recollection of the night the silence was broken and the inherent stability of their world was forever compromised. The legal legacy of the trial, while officially concluded with the conviction and incarceration of P.O. Tasosi, continued to resonate within the territory's judicial framework, influencing how subsequent generations of legal professionals, police officers, and community leaders approached the handling of internal conflicts. The case had exposed a profound, structural inadequacy in the way the territory managed the tension between the restorative, communal approach of the FA Samoa and the punitive, adversarial nature of American criminal statutes, prompting a slow, deliberate reassessment of how justice could be better served in a way that respected both legal mandates and the cultural integrity of the indigenous population. This ongoing, reflective process did not produce any easy, immediate solutions, yet it fostered a more sophisticated, nuanced understanding of the delicate balance required to maintain social order without alienating the community that the law was originally intended to serve. The discourse surrounding the case became a cornerstone for pedagogical discussions in legal training, illustrating the complexities of cross-cultural jurisprudence and the significant challenges of enforcing standard, mainland-centric policies within the unique, isolated context of the Pacific territories. The survivors, Tuafanua Tatuna and Ropati Hicks, remained as living, enduring manifestations of the event's lasting impact, their personal journeys of recovery providing a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of incomprehensible, overwhelming trauma. Their lives, while fundamentally altered by the physical scars and the internal, psychological wounds sustained on that April night, became a narrative of gradual, patient rebuilding as they sought to find meaning and stability in the years that followed the tragedy. They were forced to navigate a world that had become significantly more complicated and guarded, yet their ability to maintain their connection to the village, their families, and their heritage served as a source of strength for the broader community. Their quiet, persistent endurance was an implicit, powerful rebuttal to the chaos of the shooting, representing a commitment to life that defied the senseless, sudden violence that had sought to erase them. As they grew older, their role in the community evolved from victims of a crime into keepers of a vital, difficult memory, individuals who possessed the unique authority to speak to the pain and the possibility of healing within their shared, fractured history. For the family of Taysale Nelson, the grief was a permanent, quiet presence that dictated the rhythm of their lives, a constant, underlying note of sorrow that never truly dissipated, despite the passage of significant time. The loss of their son, brother, and relative created a void that was marked by the absence of milestones, the birthdays never celebrated, the contributions never made, and the legacy that was cut off in its infancy. This persistent, generational mourning transformed the memory of Taysale from a simple recollection of a life into a profound, collective symbol of what had been sacrificed on the altar of the night's violence. The annual commemorations, the quiet visits to the grave, and the enduring, deeply held respect for his memory ensured that he remained a vital, integral part of the village's consciousness, a reminder that the cost of the tragedy could not be measured by the years of a prison sentence or the findings of a forensic report. His legacy became a source of unity for his survivors, a central focal point that allowed them to translate their intense, personal suffering into a shared, honorable endeavor of keeping his story and his spirit alive within the heart of their community. The broader society of American Samoa, Observing the slow, steady reconstruction of Amaluya from a distance found itself grappling with a similar, ongoing struggle to integrate the lessons of the massacre into its forward-looking vision for the future. The trial had forced a candid, often uncomfortable public introspection about the inherent limitations of their social institutions and the vital importance of fostering a more robust, integrated approach to resolving the deep-seated grievances that could lead to such extreme, explosive consequences. The development of more comprehensive, community-based intervention strategies, the strengthening of the role of the Matai in formal conflict resolution, and the increased focus on the mental health and emotional well-being of the youth were all, in some form, reflections of the territory's attempt to prevent a repetition of the Amaluya tragedy. This proactive shift was an admission that the existing framework had failed, and that the only viable pathway forward involved a more active, deliberate commitment to protecting the communal fabric from the external, modern pressures that could so easily lead to its unraveling. The commitment to these long-term, structural improvements served as a functional memorial to the lives lost and the lives altered, an acknowledgement that the only way to honor the past was to build a safer, more resilient foundation for the generations yet to come. As the years continued to pass, the story of Pio Tasosi and the night of the Amaluya massacre slowly transitioned from a vivid, raw recollection into a more distant, historical reflection, yet its significance within the territory's identity remained undiminished. The tragedy had become a part of the island's collective character, a sophisticated, heartbreaking element of its truth that helped to define its perspective on community, law, and the precarious, precious nature of the peace they so desperately strove to protect. The quiet, rolling waves of the Pacific continued to lap against the shore of Amaluya, washing away the physical traces of the past, while the memory of the night's events remained anchored in the hearts and minds of those who lived there. The story of what happened on that April night is a dark, uncomfortable narrative that reminds us of the fragility of even the most tranquil, remote paradise and of the enduring, heavy burden of human responsibility that we carry whenever we interact with one another. It is a cautionary, timeless tale that speaks to the necessity of patience, the importance of communal understanding, and the absolute, non-negotiable value of the life and peace that must be protected above all else. The enduring silence that once defined the village has been replaced by a different kind of quiet, one that is marked by a deep, mature recognition of the tragedy that was, and by a steadfast, collective resolve to cultivate a future that is defined by healing rather than the destructive, uncontrollable echoes of the past. Ensuring that the lessons learned from that night continue to guide the territory toward a path of greater unity, deeper compassion, and a more sustainable, enduring form of peace for all who call the beautiful, isolated island their home. The final resonance of the Amaluya tragedy acts as a quiet, somber baseline against which the modern evolution of American Samoa is measured, a constant, underlying frequency that subtly informs the territory's ongoing search for identity. When we look back at the events of April 1986, it is not merely to recount the mechanics of a crime or the clinical delivery of a verdict, but to recognize the profound, elemental shift that occurred within the communal psyche. The massacre serves as a bridge between two eras, one that relied almost exclusively on the ancient, intuitive wisdom of the Fa Samoa, and another that is increasingly forced to articulate its values within the formalized, often rigid structure of the American legal system. This transition has been neither smooth nor complete, but rather a continuous, often agonizing process of negotiation where every legislative action, every judicial decision, and every community initiative is subtly colored by the ghosts of that dark night. The lessons learned from the sacrifice of Taysale Nelson and the permanent trauma inflicted upon the survivors have forced the people of Tutuila to cultivate a more conscious, intentional approach to social harmony, acknowledging that peace is not a passive, naturally occurring state, but an active, daily discipline that requires constant cultivation and defense against the encroachment of modern, individualistic pressures. In the contemporary context, the memory of the Amaluya shooting informs how local law enforcement, judicial officials, and village leadership collaborate, fostering a system that is gradually becoming more attuned to the specific, delicate nuances of their island culture. There is now a greater, more sophisticated understanding that the intervention of the state must not be an act of erasure, but rather one of complement, working in concert with the traditional structures to ensure that conflicts are identified and mitigated long before they reach the point of violent eruption. This maturation of the territory's justice system is perhaps the most significant, constructive outgrowth of the tragedy, representing a collective commitment to ensuring that the destructive, senseless violence witnessed decades ago remains an absolute aberration rather than a recurring feature of their shared existence. The evolution of this framework is a testament to the community's capacity to learn, adapt, and grow, transforming an experience of profound, destructive loss into a catalyst for the development of a more robust, integrated, and responsive system of governance that reflects the unique, evolving nature of their Polynesian home. Furthermore, the enduring narrative of the case has fostered a more profound, mature public conversation about the role of the individual within the collective, challenging the residents of American Samoa to define their personal responsibilities in a way that respects both their modern, globalized context and their ancient, tribal foundations. The story of Pio Taososi, a man whose perceived duty to protect his home ultimately led him to destroy the very community he cherished, serves as a permanent, cautionary paradox that continues to haunt the village's collective conscience. It forces each individual to reckon with their own capacity for fear, the potential for reflexive, disproportionate action, and the vital importance of maintaining a sense of proportion and restraint even when the pressures of the external world feel overwhelming. This internal, reflective work, performed quietly in the homes and village meetings across Tutuila, is arguably the most essential layer of protection the island possesses, as it cultivates a citizenry that is better equipped to handle the stresses and conflicts of modern life with a degree of awareness and communal accountability that was tragically absent on that fateful night in 1986. The physical landscape of the village of Amaluia itself seems to bear witness to this transformation, as the passage of decades has slowly woven the memory of the shooting into the very soil and coastal breezes of the enclave. While the site of the shooting remains physically unadorned, devoid of any official monuments or plaques, it holds a psychological gravity that is palpable to anyone familiar with the history, serving as a silent, natural sentinel of the island's commitment to peace. The vibrant, resilient nature of the tropical flora that has since reclaimed the area is, in many ways, the most fitting tribute to the survivor's journey, symbolizing the inevitable, persistent return of life and the capacity for healing even after the most devastating, earth-shaking events. The village continues to be a place of quiet, everyday existence, where the rhythm of the tide, the laughter of children, and the steady, communal work of the residents prevail, proving that the tragedy did not ultimately succeed in permanently breaking the spirit of the community. Instead, it has served as a tempering force, hardening the resolve of the people to protect their way of life and to treasure the profound, everyday peace that they now understand to be both precious and profoundly fragile. As we look toward the future of the territory, the story of Amaluia remains a foundational, necessary component of its narrative, a sophisticated, heartbreaking element of its truth that continues to inform its path forward in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. It is a story that requires us to remain humble, to recognize that no society, no matter how deeply rooted in tradition or how committed to modern ideals, is immune to the potential for self-destruction when the bonds of mutual understanding and restraint are allowed to erode. The legacy of the 1986 massacre is not one of mere sorrow, but one of persistent, active duty. The duty to remember, the duty to reflect, and the duty to maintain an unwavering, communal focus on the preservation of the life and peace that is the ultimate, non-negotiable value of their existence. This duty is carried by every resident of American Samoa, passed down through the generations as a vital, necessary component of their shared inheritance, ensuring that the lessons learned from the night the peace was broken will continue to act as a steady, guiding light for the territory as it navigates the uncertainties and the promises of the years to come. Ultimately, the Amaluia tragedy reminds us that the true measure of a society is not found in the absence of conflict, but in the nature of its response to the moments when that conflict threatens to tear it apart. The people of American Samoa, through their long, grueling journey of mourning, reflection, and quiet reconstruction, have demonstrated a profound, unwavering capacity for healing that far transcends the initial, catastrophic violence. They have shown that it is possible to carry the heavy, permanent weight of the past while remaining resolutely committed to building a future defined by a deeper, more sophisticated understanding of community, a more compassionate and integrated approach to justice, and a more resilient, enduring form of peace. The memory of Taysale Nelson, the resilience of the survivors, and the collective, long-term healing of the entire village stand as the definitive markers of this journey, ensuring that the legacy of the tragedy is not defined by the actions of the man who brought the weapon, but by the quiet, everyday strength of the people who chose to remain together, to remember, and to move forward with a renewed, deep sense of purpose. This strength is the island's true, hidden sanctuary, a source of resilience that has been tested by the ultimate, horrific trial and has emerged not merely intact, but profoundly deepened and expanded, serving as a beacon of wisdom and perspective for all who carry the heavy, sacred burden of memory in their hearts, continuously reaffirming that even in the face of the most profound, devastating fractures, the spirit of community, the impulse toward restoration, and the fundamental, human commitment to peace remain the most powerful, determining forces in the ongoing, beautiful narrative of their lives on the island they call home. As we arrive at the culmination of this exploration into the shadows of the Amalia massacre, we find ourselves standing at a reflective crossroads, looking back not at a static event confined to the annals of criminal history, but at a dynamic, evolving consciousness that defines the modern identity of American Samoa. The story of what occurred on that April night in 1986 has transcended its original context as a local tragedy to become a foundational pillar of the territory's cultural and social framework. It serves as an omnipresent reminder of the fragility of communal stability, a sobering, historical anchor that prevents the community from taking its inherent peace for granted. By meticulously deconstructing the layers of the event, from the explosive, irrational onset of violence to the complex, agonizing legal aftermath, we gain a clearer understanding of the profound, irrevocable impact that such a fracture has on the soul of an isolated, close-knit society. The narrative of Amalia is, in its essence, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit when confronted by the sudden, incomprehensible intrusion of darkness into the familiar, sacred spaces of home and lineage, illustrating that even in the wake of catastrophic loss, the impulse to persevere, to reckon with the past, and to construct a viable future remains the most significant defining characteristic of a resilient population. The journey we have taken through the details of the shooting, the forensic investigation, the adversarial courtroom struggles, and the long, quiet process of social reconstruction reveals a society that has undergone a metamorphosis, moving from a state of implicit, traditional trust to a more deliberate, conscious engagement with the mechanisms of justice and social order. This shift has not been achieved without immense cost, as the community was forced to sacrifice its illusions of immunity to external pressures and accept the reality that its traditional structures required modernization and reinforcement to survive in an increasingly interconnected world. The legacy of P.O. Tausosi's actions acts as a permanent, cautionary paradox, a symbol of the devastating consequences that arise when the protective instinct, if decoupled from the restraint of communal wisdom and the rule of law, is allowed to manifest as lethal, weaponized vengeance. This realization has permeated the broader social discourse in American Samoa, prompting a shift toward a more proactive, integrated approach to resolving grievances and fostering a culture of mutual accountability that acknowledges the inherent dignity and value of every individual, regardless of the heat of the moment or the weight of perceived provocation. As we contemplate the enduring legacy of Taysale Nelson and the profound, long-term impact on those who survived him, we are forced to confront the fundamental, inescapable truth that justice, in its most meaningful sense, is rarely found in the cold, mechanical application of punitive sentencing or the finalization of a legal case. Instead, it is found in the slow, persistent work of mourning, in the quiet conversations that take place in the shadow of the past, and in the collective decision to prioritize the restoration of communal harmony over the pursuit of reflexive, destructive retribution. The people of Tutuila have demonstrated a capacity for this higher, more difficult form of justice, showing that true resilience is not defined by the ability to move past a tragedy as if it never occurred, but by the courage to carry its weight while remaining firmly committed to building a life that honors the memory of the fallen. This commitment is evidenced by the ongoing, vibrant survival of the village of Amalia, which has refused to be defined by the blood spilled on its soil, choosing instead to define itself by the strength of its connections, the depth of its cultural heritage, and the shared resolve of its residents to protect the peace they have worked so arduously to reclaim. The historical significance of this case extends beyond the borders of American Samoa, providing a compelling, sophisticated case study for anyone seeking to understand the immense, multifaceted challenges of administering justice within indigenous communities that operate under the shadow of dominant, external legal systems. It highlights the inherent, often painful tension that exists when the restorative, holistic mechanisms of ancestral tradition meet the procedural, rigid requirements of modern law, and it serves as a powerful, cautionary lesson regarding the necessity of cultural humility and sensitivity in the design and implementation of institutional justice. The tragedy of the 1986 shooting is a reminder that the law must not be a blunt instrument used to override the lived realities of a community, but a flexible, responsive framework that seeks to acknowledge, incorporate, and support the underlying social structures that provide the true, bedrock foundation for public safety and order. This is the crucial, overarching lesson of the Amalia narrative, that justice is most effective when it is experienced as a communal, restorative process rather than an external, punitive imposition, and that the long-term health of any society depends upon its ability to harmonize its ancient, core values with the necessary, modern demands of the broader world. As we bring this narrative to its close, we are left with a lasting, profound sense of the immense, human responsibility that each of us carries in our interactions with one another, particularly within the fragile, intimate environments that we call home. The Amalia massacre is an uncomfortable, dark mirror that forces us to look inward and consider the potential for darkness within ourselves, the importance of maintaining a perspective of restraint in times of intense fear, and the vital, non-negotiable importance of cherishing the life and peace that define our shared human existence. It is a story that does not provide us with easy, comfortable answers or simple moral justifications, but rather asks us to sit with the complexity and the heartache of the human condition, recognizing that we are all, in various ways, navigating the same, precarious terrain of human connection, vulnerable to the same sudden, devastating fractures and responsible for the same, slow, difficult work of healing. The resilience shown by the people of American Samoa provides us with a profound, enduring beacon of hope, reminding us that even after the most devastating, earth-shaking events, the capacity for compassion, for reflection, and for the patient rebuilding of community remains the most potent, life-affirming force in our possession, a force that can bridge even the widest, deepest chasms created by violence and loss. In the final assessment, the enduring memory of that April night in 1986 remains an essential, vital part of the territory's truth, a difficult, sobering, and profoundly transformative chapter that has helped to forge a stronger, more self-aware, and deeply unified society. The legacy of the Amalia shooting is not found in the weapon, the crime, or the sentence, but in the enduring spirit of the people who were there, the individuals who have carried the memory with honor, and the community that has chosen, above all else, to stand together in the face of the ultimate, horrific trial. Their journey is a testament to the fact that the narrative of our lives is not authored by the events that happen to us, but by our response to those events, and that the true measure of our strength is found in our ability to transform even the most devastating, painful experiences into a source of enduring, communal wisdom and profound, life-affirming transformation. As the sun continues to set over the horizon of Tutuila, casting its golden, fading light over the lush, emerald forests and the crashing, persistent waves of the Pacific, It marks the end of yet another day in a village that has known the absolute, chilling reach of darkness, but has found the courage to continue walking toward the light. The story of Amelia, therefore, is not a requiem for a lost paradise, but a testament to the persistent, unyielding reality of human survival and the beautiful, complex, and profound commitment to peace that defines the people of American Samoa, serving as a beacon of perspective for all of us as we continue to navigate our own paths, carrying the heavy, sacred burden of our shared human memory, and striving every day to build a world that is defined by the profound, enduring power of our connections to one another, the healing necessity of our reflections, and the unwavering, fundamental belief in the possibility of a future that is rooted not in the echoes of violence, but in the vibrant, thriving strength of our communal spirit, our collective capacity for restoration, and our perpetual, shared commitment to the fundamental, non-negotiable, and beautiful sanctity of life itself. The conclusion of our long, contemplative journey through the Amelia tragedy brings us to a final synthesis of why such stories remain so essential to our shared human experience. We have traversed the landscape of a remote island, witnessed the catastrophic collapse of communal safety, and explored the complex, often friction-filled intersection where ancestral tradition meets the uncompromising rigors of modern law. Yet, to view this narrative merely as a chronicle of a violent incident is to overlook its deeper significance as a meditation on the nature of societal resilience and the heavy, enduring weight of collective memory. The massacre, while a singular event in the chronology of American Samoa, serves as a prism through which we can observe the fundamental struggles of any close-knit population trying to maintain its integrity in a world that is constantly encroaching with new, complex, and often incompatible demands. It reminds us that every community is essentially a fragile construct, maintained not just by the presence of rules or the authority of the state, but by the subtle, persistent, and deeply internal commitment of each individual to the collective peace, a commitment that can be unraveled with terrifying speed when fear, intoxication, or desperation are allowed to bypass the vital, mediating channels of reason and restraint. As we reflect on the totality of the Amelia narrative, we see that the true legacy of the tragedy is not found in the finality of the prison cell or the cold, clinical results of forensic science, but in the ongoing, quiet, and profoundly determined life of the village itself. The survival of the community, despite the trauma that threatened to fracture it irreparably, is the ultimate testament to the efficacy of the human impulse toward restoration. When we speak of the importance of this story, we are speaking of the necessity of keeping the memory of the fallen, Taysale Nelson, alive, not as a symbol of the violence that claimed him, but as a reminder of the precious, irreplaceable nature of the life that was extinguished. This act of remembering is a form of active resistance against the finality of the tragedy, an intentional choice by the survivors to build their future upon the foundations of their shared history, no matter how painful that history may be. It is this capacity to integrate even the most devastating experiences into the ongoing narrative of the community that allows the people of American Samoa to move forward with a sense of dignity, purpose, and profound understanding of what is truly at stake in the preservation of their communal way of life. The structural and cultural lessons derived from this case have permeated the way the territory engages with its own future, particularly in the way it views the relationship between local governance and the influence of external, federal mandates. The case serves as an enduring, influential reference point for those who advocate for a more culturally grounded, restorative model of justice, arguing that the true measure of a legal system's effectiveness is its ability to address the root causes of conflict while fostering a genuine sense of accountability and reconciliation within the community itself. This perspective is not a rejection of law, but an invitation to a more sophisticated, holistic implementation of justice that acknowledges the unique, traditional contexts of the people it serves. By incorporating the wisdom of the elders, the insights of the community leaders, and the lived experiences of those directly affected by violence, the territory is slowly working toward a model that is both legally sound and culturally resonant, a synthesis that represents the most promising path forward for all isolated, indigenous communities navigating the complexities of the modern world. Furthermore, the Amalia narrative acts as a deeply personal, internal compass for the individuals who were present and who carried the burden of the night's events through the decades that followed. Their personal stories, characterized by quiet moments of reflection, the deliberate pursuit of stability, and the persistent commitment to their families and neighbors, provide a human scale to the tragedy that is often lost in the more clinical, analytical assessments of legal cases. Their individual resilience is the bedrock upon which the community's recovery was built, proving that the most profound forms of healing occur not in the spotlight of the courtroom or the formal declarations of the state, but in the daily, unglamorous, and deeply significant work of living life in the presence of memory. Every act of kindness, every gesture of forgiveness, and every moment of communal solidarity is a small, quiet, yet powerful victory over the destructive, chaotic forces of the past, reinforcing the truth that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by the grace and courage with which we respond to those events. As we look across the horizon of the future, we recognize that the story of the Amalia massacre will always serve as a necessary, sobering shadow that provides depth and perspective to the island's light. It is an essential component of the territory's truth, a complex, difficult, and profoundly human narrative that prevents the community from falling into the trap of complacency. The story reminds us that peace is a fragile, conditional state that requires the active, conscious, and sometimes painful participation of everyone, particularly in the moments when the pressures of the external world seem most intent on tearing our connections apart. The lessons of that April night are not just for the people of American Samoa. They are universal, speaking to the fundamental challenge that all of us face in our attempts to build and maintain a life of dignity, meaning, and mutual respect in a world that is often marked by misunderstanding, conflict, and sudden, unforeseen change. In our final reflection, we are reminded of the inherent dignity of the human journey, characterized by our persistent desire to create beauty, to foster connection, and to build meaning even in the most challenging and unforgiving environments. The people of American Samoa, through their journey of mourning, reconciliation, and reconstruction, have offered the world a profound, enduring model of what it means to be a community that refuses to be defined by its trauma. They have shown us that even in the wake of the most devastating, earth-shaking ruptures, the capacity for compassion, for reflection, and for the patient, step-by-step rebuilding of the communal fabric remains the most potent, life-affirming force in our possession. This, ultimately, is the message that survives the passage of time, that our strength is found not in our isolation or in our individual endeavors, but in the depth of our connections to one another, the shared honesty of our reflections, and our unwavering, fundamental commitment to the sanctity of life in all its complex, beautiful, and sometimes tragic variations. As we close this narrative account, we hold the memory of the Amalia massacre not with a desire for judgment, but with a profound, solemn respect for the truth of the events and the immense, enduring struggle of those who have navigated the aftermath with such quiet, determined grace. The story remains a living, breathing part of the territory's identity, a constant reminder of the fragility of peace and the immense, shared responsibility that we all carry for the safety and well-being of our neighbors. It is a story that encourages us to look at our own communities with new eyes, to appreciate the quiet, everyday moments of harmony, and to realize that the foundations of our world are built on the fragile, vital, and non-negotiable strength of our commitment to one another. May the memory of this tragedy serve as a guiding, light-bearing force that continues to illuminate the path toward a more compassionate, understanding, and unified future for all who call the beautiful Pacific Islands their home, ensuring that the lessons learned from the night the peace was broken continue to guide them toward a destiny defined not by the destructive echoes of the past, but by the vibrant, thriving reality of their communal, restorative, and profoundly resilient future. Standing together, always, in the quiet, persistent, and beautiful light of their own shared, hard-won, and deeply cherished peace. As we reach the conclusion of this exhaustive and somber exploration of the Amalia tragedy, we find ourselves standing in a space of quiet contemplation, where the echoes of history meet the profound resilience of the present. The narrative of that fateful April night has traveled far beyond the confines of a small, coastal village in American Samoa, transforming into an enduring testament to the human condition and the complex, often painful labor required to preserve communal peace in an increasingly turbulent world. The journey through the details of the massacre, from the initial, chaotic collision of youth and intoxication to the sterile, rigid atmosphere of the courtroom and the long, agonizing aftermath of social healing, has provided us with a lens through which to examine the deepest, most foundational questions of justice, identity, and the meaning of community. This is not merely a story of crime and punishment. It is a story of a society grappling with its own shadow, attempting to integrate a horrific rupture into the ongoing, unfolding narrative of its own existence. By holding the memory of this event with the solemnity it deserves, we acknowledge that the true strength of a people is not measured by their avoidance of conflict, but by their capacity to survive it, to learn from it, and to emerge with a more mature, profound commitment to the sanctity of life and the restorative power of communal empathy. The lessons that resonate from the experience of Amaluya are universal, transcending the specific cultural and geographic boundaries of the Pacific Islands to speak directly to the shared, fundamental challenges that define all of humanity in the modern era. We are reminded that the bonds of community are both infinitely strong and terrifyingly fragile, requiring the constant, intentional attention of every individual to maintain their integrity. The tragic turn of events in 1986 serves as a stark, uncompromising warning of what happens when fear, anger, and the sudden, irrational impulse for self-protection are allowed to supersede the slower, more deliberate and life-affirming values of communal dialogue and mutual respect. The story challenges us to consider our own roles within the societies we inhabit, prompting us to ask how we might foster a more vigilant, compassionate, and integrated approach to the inevitable conflicts that arise between neighbors, families, and generations, ensuring that we never again allow ourselves to drift into a place where violence becomes the primary or only language of resolution. In looking back at the long road to recovery that the village of Amaluya has traversed, we are forced to admire the quiet, unglamorous persistence of those who are tasked with rebuilding their world from the ruins of their own trauma. The healing process has not been marked by dramatic, cinematic resolutions or a total erasure of the past, but by the slow, iterative work of living in the presence of memory, acknowledging the loss of Taysale Nelson with a dignity and respect that honors his life, rather than lingering solely on the violence of his death. This commitment to honoring the past while resolutely building toward the future is the most significant indicator of the community's wisdom, demonstrating that they have understood the fundamental truth that justice is not found in the satisfaction of retribution, but in the restoration of communal harmony and the preservation of the bonds that define their shared identity. The survivors, the families, and the wider village have become architects of a new way forward, constructing a framework of living that incorporates the hard-won lessons of their history into their daily interactions, their educational systems, and their ongoing efforts to maintain a resilient, culturally integrated way of life. The significance of this narrative is further enhanced by the profound influence it has exerted on the evolution of the territory's understanding of itself, pushing the society toward a more sophisticated, self-aware identity that values the traditions of the past while remaining open to the complexities of the globalized future. The legal, social, and psychological shifts that have occurred in American Samoa in the wake of the massacre represent a monumental, collective effort to reconcile the indigenous, tribal structures of the FA Samoa with the broader, universal requirements of human rights and the rule of law. This synthesis, while still evolving and occasionally fraught with its own unique difficulties, is the definitive mark of a society that is not merely enduring, but actively growing, demonstrating an impressive capacity for introspection and a steadfast dedication to building a reality that is safer, more compassionate, and more deeply aligned with the values of mutual support and communal accountability that have always been the heartbeat of the island life. As we bring this account to its final resting point, we are left with a renewed appreciation for the delicate, precious nature of the peace that characterizes our everyday existence, recognizing that it is an achievement that requires constant protection, profound patience, and the unwavering, fundamental belief in the potential for healing even after the most catastrophic of ruptures. The story of Amalia will continue to echo through the generations, not as a source of despair or a reason to turn away from the world, but as a guiding, light-bearing reminder of what is at stake when we lose our way and of the immense, transformative power that lies in our ability to stand together, to listen to one another, and to commit ourselves to the slow, persistent work of creating a world defined by the light of our shared humanity. The memory of the massacre is a heavy, sacred burden that the community carries with strength and honor, a testament to their enduring capacity for grace in the face of incomprehensible darkness, and a beacon of hope for all of us as we continue to traverse the challenging, intricate, and deeply interconnected landscape of our own lives. The final word on the Amalia massacre is not a word of judgment, but a word of witness, a solemn acknowledgement of the truth of the history, the depth of the loss, and the magnificent, unyielding reality of the resilience that has emerged from the depths of the tragedy. It is a story that has been told with the intent to honor the lives that were changed and to respect the long, difficult path of those who were left to make sense of the senseless, ensuring that the lessons learned from the dark night of April 1986 continue to serve as a vital, active, and light-bearing force in the continued life of the territory. The people of American Samoa, through their long-term commitment to remembering, reflecting, and rebuilding, have provided us with a profound, lasting contribution to the collective wisdom of humanity, teaching us that the only true antidote to the sudden, destructive eruptions of violence is the sustained, courageous, and deeply human commitment to the work of restoration, to the practice of empathy, and to the unwavering belief that no matter how deep the fracture, the bonds of community, when tended with care and respect, are more than capable of holding us all together in the face of the ultimate, irreversible trial. As the sun sets over the Pacific once more, casting its long, golden shadows across the volcanic ridges of Tutuila and the quiet, coastal beauty of Amalia, we are reminded that every day is a new, profound opportunity to choose the path of restoration over the path of destruction, to choose the language of compassion over the silence of fear, and to reaffirm our commitment to the fundamental, non-negotiable value of our shared, communal life. The story remains open, continuing to be written in the daily, small, and profoundly significant actions of those who call the islands their home, ensuring that the legacy of their experience remains not a static memory, but a living, breathing guide toward a more unified, peaceful, and resilient future. We carry the story forward with a solemn, deep respect for the complex, multifaceted truth it reveals, and with a lasting, abiding belief that the spirit of the people of American Samoa, characterized by their courage, their deep, traditional wisdom, and their unyielding capacity for healing, stands as an enduring example of what it means to be human, to be connected, and to remain resolutely committed to the preservation of the light against the encroaching shadows, standing together always. In the quiet, persistent, and beautiful strength of their own, hard-won, and deeply cherished peace, serving as a beacon of perspective for all the world as we continue to walk our own, winding, and sometimes difficult paths, always striving to build a future defined by the profound, enduring power of our connections, the healing necessity of our reflections, and the unwavering, fundamental belief in the sanctity of our shared existence, forever honoring the lives that have been touched by the tragedy while celebrating the vibrant, thriving, and profoundly resilient future that continues to bloom in the quiet, gentle, and beautiful light of their ongoing, collective peace. The conclusion of our comprehensive exploration of the Amalia massacre leads us to a final, profound reflection on the nature of memory itself and how communities navigate the intersection of tragedy and identity. Throughout these chapters, we have carefully parsed the events of April 1986, not to satisfy a morbid curiosity, but to honor the complexity of a narrative that serves as a cornerstone of American Samoa's contemporary history. This story, which began as a localized rupture in a quiet coastal village, has evolved into a multi-generational discourse on the fragility of social order and the enduring power of restorative justice. The massacre stands as a stark, uncompromising focal point that forces us to reconcile the inherent desire for a peaceful, communal existence with the reality of human fallibility and the chaotic influence of external pressures. By engaging with this narrative, we are forced to move beyond the superficial details of the crime and confront the deeper, more unsettling questions about our own capacities for fear, our potential for irrational action, and the vital necessity of maintaining a vigilant, compassionate commitment to one another, especially when the structures of our society are tested by the sudden onset of violence. The enduring resonance of the Amelia tragedy provides a critical template for understanding how similar isolated, culturally distinct societies might approach the inevitable frictions of modernization. The path taken by the residents of Tutuila, one characterized by a difficult, often painful blend of traditional reconciliation and formal legal adherence, is perhaps the most honest, realistic model for how communities can survive when their world is irrevocably changed by an act of internal betrayal. It is a path that acknowledges the failure of the past while refusing to be held hostage by it, opting instead for a future that seeks to synthesize the best of their ancestral wisdom with the necessary, structural protections of the modern state. This synthesized approach is the territory's most significant contribution to the broader, global discourse on justice, demonstrating that the preservation of identity is not about resisting change, but about navigating it with a clear, honest, and courageous commitment to the fundamental principles of communal well-being and individual dignity that define the human experience. As we consider the personal trajectories of those most profoundly impacted by the events, we are reminded of the silent, daily heroism that often goes unacknowledged in the wake of such a tragedy. The survivors, who were forced to carry the physical and psychological marks of that night into their adulthood, have become the true, living custodians of the territory's resilience. Their lives, while undeniably shaped by the trauma of the shooting, are not defined by it. Rather, they are defined by the grace with which they have navigated the subsequent decades, the deep, abiding connections they have fostered with their families, and their unwavering, quiet commitment to the life they were so nearly denied. Their presence among us is a profound, living challenge to the finality of violence, a demonstration that the human spirit possesses an almost inexhaustible capacity to redefine itself, to integrate the deepest scars into a life of purpose, and to continue moving forward despite the weight of the past. Their collective story is a testament to the fact that healing is not a destination, but a continuous, disciplined, and profoundly human practice that finds its strength in the persistent choice to value life, to foster connection, and to remain open to the possibility of beauty even in the most shadowed corners of our experience. The memory of Taysale Nelson, woven into the fabric of the village's collective identity, has been transformed over time from a source of raw, immediate grief into an enduring, protective force that reinforces the community's commitment to peace. By integrating his memory into the life of the village, the residents have ensured that his death was not merely a tragic end, but an enduring, influential presence that guides their efforts to cultivate a safer, more unified future. This intentional, communal act of remembering is a vital, necessary component of the healing process, a way of ensuring that the lessons learned from the night the peace was broken remain active, vibrant, and relevant to the generations that follow. It is a commitment that speaks to the profound, spiritual necessity of honor, reminding us that we are all, in various ways, tethered to the lives of those who have gone before us, and that our ability to move forward with purpose and dignity is contingent upon our capacity to carry the weight of our shared history with honesty, respect, and a profound, abiding sense of communal responsibility. As we step back from this narrative, we are left with a clearer understanding of the immense, human responsibility that each of us carries as members of a global, interconnected community, recognizing that our lives are defined by the connections we build, the conflicts we navigate, and the wisdom we extract from the most difficult and trying of circumstances. The Amelia Massacre, while a uniquely Polynesian tragedy in its origins, is a universal narrative of the human experience, reminding us that no place is immune to the potential for rupture and that the strength of our response is the only thing that truly matters. We are all, to some degree, architects of our own communal landscapes, responsible for the environments we cultivate and the values we choose to uphold, particularly in the face of the sudden, unforeseen challenges that threaten to undermine our peace. The people of American Samoa have provided us with an invaluable, enduring example of what it means to lead with wisdom, to act with compassion, and to remain resolute in the face of the ultimate, irreversible trial, and their example serves as a guiding light for us as we continue to traverse the challenging, intricate landscape of our own lives. The final testament of this narrative is one of profound, life-affirming hope, a belief that the spirit of community, when nurtured with the truth of our past and the commitment to a more just and empathetic future, is more than capable of overcoming even the most devastating of shadows. The story of Amaluya is not a static relic of a bygone era. It is a living, breathing guide that continues to shape the identity, the justice system, and the communal heart of the territory, ensuring that the progress made since 1986 remains grounded in the reality of their shared, hard-won wisdom. It is a story that requires our attention, our reflection, and our deepest, most solemn respect, for it is through the act of witnessing such truth that we become better equipped to face the uncertainties of our own world, to cherish the peace that we have worked so hard to build, and to remain forever committed to the sacred, fundamental, and non-negotiable value of our communal, shared existence. May the memory of the past continue to serve as the foundation for a vibrant, thriving, and profoundly unified future, where the destructive echoes of the massacre are entirely eclipsed by the resonant, persistent, and beautiful strength of a people who have proven, time and again, that their capacity for healing is the most enduring, defining, and truly beautiful force in their lives, forever anchoring them in the quiet, gentle, and beautiful light of their ongoing, collective peace, standing together always in the strength of their connection, the wisdom of their memory, and the unwavering, fundamental belief in the possibility of a world that is defined not by the violence of the past, but by the flourishing, diverse, and profoundly human promise of their own, shared, and deeply cherished future, forever moving forward with a sense of purpose that is both humble and bold, acknowledging the truth of where they have been while embracing the vast, beautiful, and uncertain potential of where they are going, forever held in the embrace of their shared, communal, and profoundly resilient peace.